Welcome to the enchanting world of Bella Brown's historical Western romance. I'm delighted to share this journey with you today. Before we ride into the story, if you enjoy these narrations, please consider subscribing to this channel. It's a small gesture that makes a big difference, and your support makes it possible to continue bringing these heartfelt tales to listeners everywhere, completely free of charge. Now find yourself a comfortable spot, close your eyes if you wish, and allow your imagination to travel back to the American frontier where adventure and romance await. This audiobook presentation features The Other Bride's Christmas by Bella Brown, all rights reserved. Chapter 1. Marjorie, where is my parcel? The one with Jeffrey's watch. It was here just a moment ago. May heard the growing hysteria in the women's voices as she moved away from them. Experience told her to keep her chin up and to walk at a normal pace so as not to draw attention through the crowds that ebbed around her. Her small frame allowed her to slip easily through the busy New York street. Any cause for someone to look her direction could be the end of her, and she'd worked too hard to give it all up now. The pretty gift box containing the watch was secreted up her sleeve in one smooth movement. She'd also managed to swipe another parcel from unsuspecting passers-by. The upscale shops and fancy hotels quickly turned to the tightly packed tenement buildings and the dirty streets that she knew so well as she headed back toward home. Laundry was strung out to dry between buildings, although it was only accumulating more filth the longer it stayed out here. Grubby children with skinny legs ran by, chasing each other or trying to get away from something. One of them had his head turned almost completely to the side as he charged straight into May's side. Oof! He bounced off her hip, giving her a foul look. Hey, watch where you're going. The youth wasn't much younger than she was. He probably 14 or 15. He was certainly old enough that he was already making a living the same way most of them did in this neighborhood, by lying, cheating, stealing, or worse. May still clutched her parcel tightly against her ribs. They were hard-won, and she wasn't as absent-minded as the silly women she'd taken them from. "Who do you think you're talking to like that?" she scolded. By the look on his face, he was ready with a retort. The sun happened to break through the sooty air at that moment, and his eyes landed on the ice-blue eyes that were staring down at him. "May McKinley. Sorry, didn't see you there." He darted around her and was gone down an alley, his feet crunching in the frozen muck. Her heart sank a little as she watched him go, but May continued her journey toward home. Their building was indistinguishable from the other large housing units that crowded against it, and yet she turned for the door as though it was the only one on the block. She raced up the stairs, ignoring the shouts, the babies crying, and the horrific stench. George whipped open the door just as she arrived. His brows shot up toward hair the same color as her own, a dirty blonde that could be both brown and blonde when the need to change identities called for it. "There you are. I was just going out." "What for? It's almost supper time." She pushed past him and into the tiny dwelling. The fire had gone out, and she shivered in the thin material of her dress. "You know?" George never really did say much about what he was doing or where he was going, and for the most part, May had learned not to ask. It was obvious that he'd earned himself enough of a reputation that May, by default, could move through the slums without being harassed. He shut the door and crossed the room as she put her parcels on the small table George had lifted from the back of someone's cart last month. "What have you got there?" "I don't know," May replied honestly. She pulled at the strings of the bigger package first, saving the other for last. The brown paper fell away to reveal a deep blue dress. It didn't have all the lace and ruffles and decorations that she often saw most of the ladies she stole from wearing, but it was made of the finest wool May had ever laid her hands on. "Will you look at that?" George sneered as he waved his hand to the side. "You're not going to get much for that. It's not even silk." Prosody rate %. "I think I can find a use for it." May lifted the dress out of its packaging, noting that it was just about her size. "Well, what else have you got?" "I've got to get going," George reminded her impatiently. "You'll like this one." May quickly grabbed at the string. It was a small box, the thick paper secured with a red ribbon, and it only took her a moment to have the pocket watch in the palm of her hand. Say! George scooped it up with his thick fingers and pressed the button to see the face. That's a nice one. That'll keep us good for at least a week or two. Keep up the good work, and maybe someday we'll be out of this place. Right? May's eyes fell back down to the pocket watch as it marked the time that continued to pass, even though nothing had really changed. George slipped the valuable watch inside his waistcoat. What is it? It's just that we keep saying that. May had thought about this many times. It was a conversation she'd rehearsed in her head, although she'd never quite been able to begin it until now. Ever since Ma and Papa passed away, we've talked about how we're going to do better someday. We're going to get out of here. We're going to have one of those nice townhouses. We're going to be the rich folks that people like us steal from. But I don't want to live like this anymore, George. I don't want to take from other people. His mouth turned to a hard line. Then what do you want? He demanded. Because it's not very easy out there in this world. I shouldn't have to tell you that. If I thought I could make more by getting an honest job, then I would. I've tried, but I can't, May. It just doesn't work like that. Maybe it could, if we what? He retorted, his cheeks reddening. May, don't bother getting all your hopes and dreams up. You can work your fingers to the bone, and you can pray your heart out in church every Sunday, but you're still going to be right here in the slums where you belong. George. But he was already out the door, slamming it behind him, the noise lost among countless others in the crowded building. With a sigh, May turned to the fire. She poked around in the ashes until she found a few hot coals, but the limited bits of coal and wood she had would barely last long enough to cook something for supper. The knock at the door made her jump up. With the poker still in her hand, May carefully crossed the room. Who is it? It's Jenny. May opened the door to admit the girl from across the hall, who came bustling in like the devil himself was chasing her, carrying a small valise in her hand. What is it? What's the matter? I'm leaving, Jenny squealed. No more working at the hotel, cleaning up after all these rich women who leave their powder everywhere and complain when I don't fluff their pillows up enough. I thought you liked your work at the hotel. May blinked as she tried to keep up with her friend. She'd been so jealous of Jenny's work, even though she had to walk for an hour each way to get to the upscale hotel and barely earned enough money to eat. It still sounded far better than filching from rich women in the hopes of becoming one. Not enough to stay there forever, and it's never going to be enough for me to move out of this place. Angela says differently, but I know that Richard doesn't really want me there anyway, especially since they had the new baby. Angela was Jenny's sister, older sister. They had the same brown hair and pale skin, though Angela's eyes were often ringed by deep shadows. For as long as the family had lived opposite George and May, Angela had been pregnant. Richard didn't like anybody, but May kept that bit to herself. Jenny dropped her valise by her feet and rolled her brown eyes. We're on top of each other in there as it is, but this new baby is very colicky. That's part of why I'm here. I was going to ask if I could sleep here tonight. I have to get up early in the morning, and if I listen to that baby crying all night long, I'm never going to make my train. Certainly, but you're going to have to tell me where you're going, May insisted. I've been writing to a man in the Matrimonial Times, Jenny explained, her brown curls bouncing. He lives out west, and he's looking for a new wife. So that's it? You're just going? May's mind was whirring. She'd heard of such things, but she'd never known anyone who had done it. You're going to the other side of the country to marry a man you've never met? We've written back and forth. Jenny tugged at her gloves and dropped into the battered armchair that May had been meaning to repair, making herself at home. We've shared a little bit about ourselves, and it's all settled. Congratulations. May turned back to the fire. You're welcome to stay the night. George has gone out, and I don't think he'll be back until dawn. He usually isn't. Their meager supper was enough to keep their stomachs from growling, and they soon settled down for the evening. May lay on her side on her cot in the corner, flipping first one way and then the other as she tried to settle her mind. It was impossible. With the light of the fire casting a dull glow into the room, she swung her legs and sat on the edge of the bed. The noises of the building rarely disturbed her, but tonight it was as though everything was amplified. The fights, the screams, the grind of too many people crammed into the smallest of spaces. May scrubbed at her face. Jenny lay on a makeshift bed of blankets and canvas sacks. She faced the wall and slumbered deeply, her soft snores joining in the cacophony of sounds. In the low light, May's eyes moved around the room. Jenny's valise was right there. May nibbled her lower lip. Jenny had found a way to escape. A better life awaited her. Jenny hadn't had to live the way that May had had to. Jenny had a brother-in-law who'd helped her get the job at the hotel. George didn't believe in a regular job. May hesitated for just a moment. She wanted to know what kind of things you wrote to a man who proposed to you. The valise opened with a small click. Jenny slept on. Again, May dithered. Jenny was her friend. Didn't she deserve to be happy? She opened the case. Jenny had folded her pretty dresses into neat squares. There was also a hairbrush and other items that told May just how better Jenny's life was. The packet of papers was easy enough to find, and May leaned close to the fire as she opened them. Several letters were bundled together and tied with string. She tugged at the end of the twine. She could read one, and she'd know what kind of stuff to write to a man she'd never met. A slip of paper dropped out and fell to the floor. Her fingers shook as she picked it up. May held a train ticket in her hand. A train ticket that would take someone all the way out to Colorado. Her heart pounded, her eyes moving between Jenny and the ticket that she held. Wasn't George always telling her to look for opportunities, to take whatever fell into her path? Glancing at Jenny's sleeping form just a few feet away, and then the blue wool dress that she'd stolen earlier that day, May looked back down at the ticket. She knew what she had to do. Chapter 2. I don't want a new mother. Jonathan stamped his foot, making all the china in the hutch rattle. William Small looked down at his son. He folded his arms across his chest, but the gesture was one of futility, not intimidation. You need one, whether you want one or not. What do I need one for? Jonathan challenged. This had been an endless struggle over the past year, and William hoped that when Jenny arrived on the train, it would all be over with. The same reason that anyone needs a mother. She'll care for you, cook your suppers, and mend your clothes. She'll take care of the house. Jonathan scrunched up his small face. That's what nannies are for. Yes, but how many of them had they gone through? There weren't very many women out here in West Ridge, Colorado, and the few that he'd managed to hire in town and bring out to the ranch hadn't lasted very long. William certainly knew why. A mother is much better than a nanny. Is she pretty? A small voice asked from the other side of the kitchen. Camilla was there at the table, trying her best to pour the cornbread batter into the pan and getting it all over the table instead. With her pale hair and bright blue eyes, she was Jonathan's twin in every way but her demeanor. Now she stood with the dripping bowl in one hand, completely oblivious as the dog lapped up what had fallen on the floor. I don't really know, William replied honestly. She told me she has brown hair, brown eyes. She says she's a very good cook. If he thought this might assuage his daughter's worries, he was wrong. She put the bowl on the table with a clatter and poked her finger into a puddle of batter. What if she isn't nice? I'm sure she's nice. At least Jenny had seemed nice enough. William thought a man could certainly get a feeling for these sorts of things after they'd exchanged several letters, but he had to admit to himself that as Jenny's arrival drew closer and closer, he was starting to get nervous. I wouldn't marry someone who wasn't nice. You're going to marry her? Disgusting, Jonathan exclaimed. That is what you do if you want a wife, son. William put his hands in his pockets and rocked back on his heels. They'd already been over some of this, but he'd explain it 100 times if it would make him feel better. Now it was Jonathan's turn to fold his arms over his chest. I like it when it's just the three of us. Don't you mean 4? A harsh voice sounded from the doorway. Jonathan sighed. I didn't mean you, Graham. William's mother shuffled into the room. Rosella Small's hair had gone a steely gray, and she kept it wrapped up in a knot on the back of her head where it would be out of her way. She flapped her apron at the boy. You need to go upstairs and pick up the toys and clothes you've left all over your room. You know that's not how we keep the house. Camilla, you go up and check your room too." The twins charged up the stairs with the dog running after them, although William was sure that Jonathan would have a lot more to say if he thought he could get away with it. "They're not very happy about this whole arrangement," he said as he turned away from the stairs and toward his mother. She shook her head as she picked up a towel and began mopping up the cornbread batter. "I don't think you can expect them to be. They didn't do very well when Molly died, and they're not going to do well with someone new. Not at first, anyway. Don't fret yourself about that too much, William." "Why not?" He ran a hand through his hair, the same corn silk color as his children's. "Jonathan is determined to chase away anybody I bring into this house. I'm sure the only reason you're still here is because you're blood. Camilla is just so shy and sweet, but she's still just so heartbroken that she's not going to let herself get close to anyone." Rosella glanced up with sharp eyes. "Tell me something, son. Do you have a good feeling about this? Do you think you're doing the right thing?" William braced himself on the other side of the table, narrowly avoiding putting his palm right in a puddle of batter. He'd thought about this long and hard. In fact, he'd lain awake far more often than he'd slept over the last couple of months while he tried to make his decision. Jenny knew how to cook. She worked in a hotel, so there was no reason she shouldn't know how to take care of a house. Of course, telling the children she was a maid had been a mistake, as it only given Jonathan another reason to dislike her. "I've got this feeling in my gut that just won't go away. It's either some terrible indigestion or it's telling me this is the right thing to do." His mother laughed as she picked up the pan and put it in the oven. "I think being a parent is pretty much like that. You never know if you're making the right decision, and you won't find out until years down the road." "That doesn't exactly make me feel better, Mama." William glanced out the window. A thick layer of snow had fallen over the hills in the pasture, and the sky was a chilly shade of gray. "After Molly died, I kept asking God how I was going to get through this. How could I provide for these kids on my own? How could I give them the sort of home that they truly need? I felt so guilty." "Dear," Rosella turned to her son. She took his hands in her own while she looked up into his eyes. "The very fact that you want so badly to be a good father means that you are one. Children are never easy, but they're always worth the work. Right now, the important thing is for you to be happy." "You don't think I am happy?" he challenged. "I've got the ranch and a wonderful home. I have 2 amazing children, and I even have you here with me. Shouldn't that be enough?" She gave him a smile that made her eyes sparkle. "I don't think so. Everyone wants a true partner in life. You had that with Molly, but I think you can find it again. The Lord will make sure it all works out the way it's supposed to." William pulled in a deep breath and nodded. "Golly, I truly hope that you're right. There have been times that I've felt abandoned. I just have to pray that this is the right thing to do." Chapter 3. May's stomach had felt like it was up in her chest as she left New York City, sure that at any moment Jenny would come flying into the station to stop her from doing this horrible deed. She hadn't, and so May's stomach had slowly settled back down where it was supposed to be as she crossed the country. May had been light-fingered since before she could toddle about. It was how the McKinleys worked. As she'd grown older, she'd tried to stay on the straight and narrow, only taking from those who could well afford it or who were careless with their things, like the women yesterday. It was one thing to lift a package that had been carelessly left on the back of a cart, or to simply slip something from the general store up her sleeve. The victims had been nameless and oftentimes faceless. The train journey had allowed her time to consider why she'd felt so nauseous. She'd settled on the realization that she'd never stolen from her friend before. Jenny was entirely different to the faceless people. She was someone who lived right across the hall from May and George, someone with whom Jenny had been able to commiserate with about their situation. Jenny had worked hard to get herself out of that situation, and May couldn't help but wonder if this final theft had been the worst one of all. Now, as the flat plains of Missouri, Kansas, and the eastern part of Colorado had risen into the ridges and valleys of the Rocky Mountains, her stomach also decided to rise once again. She'd taken the ticket, and she'd gotten away with that. She now had to deal with the consequences. The train chugged to a stop. Through the window, she could see a platform crowded with strange faces, all turned expectantly toward the train. She glanced over them and then down at her gloved hands. William Small, the man Jenny had been writing to, should be among them. May had memorized the letters on her journey, reading them repeatedly until the creases in the paper threatened to come apart. She was to look for the man with the braided hat band. But who was he? She knew his name and his occupation, of course. There would be food on the table and a fire in the hearth. William's letters had described his home and ranch in such great detail that May could close her eyes and see them before her. Even so, he was a stranger. She'd come halfway across the country to put her life in the hands of a man she'd never met. It was a foolish chance she was taking, but it was the only chance to escape 5 points that she'd probably ever get. May retrieved her battered valise from under the seat. She'd reasoned that Jenny could indeed find herself another husband, seeing as she'd done it once. It hadn't felt right to steal her clothing and her case, too. May was perfectly content to wait her turn to get off the car, but of course the gentleman across the aisle had to wave her first with a tip of his hat. "Thank you," she murmured, unused to the courteous gesture. Normally, she was being chased off stoops and shoved out of the way. But she'd worn the navy woolen gown and guessed that she must at least look the part. She stepped down off the car. The chill wind blasted her. May pressed her teeth together to keep them from chattering as she scanned the numerous people on the platform. The crush and crowd would have been perfect for snagging a few wallets and a bit of jewelry, but May reminded herself as she followed the sea of people that she didn't have to do that anymore. This was the beginning of her new life, one where she would have a family and a home. She would be a proper lady, even if she wasn't entirely certain what that would mean for her. She spotted a man greeting a business partner who'd just come off the train in a fine suit. A woman, with her gaggle of children, lit up as the man of the house returned from some distant city. It seemed that everyone knew exactly who they were meeting but her. Then her gaze fell upon a tall and handsome man. His bright blue eyes locked onto hers, and May's lungs refused to work properly for a moment. The long brown duster he wore was clean, even down at the edges where the muck of the streets and the sweat of horses often accumulated. His boots were well used, but May noted that they, too, were clean and polished. She couldn't say exactly what was making her stare at him so. He was obviously far better off than she was, but there wasn't a gold watch chain clipped around his button or even a fancy silk pocket square. Her eyes drifted upward. The man wore a braided hat band. He seemed to have realized the connection at the same time she did because he smiled as he stepped forward. "Miss Taylor? Oh, no, May paused as she realized just how deep she'd gone into this scheme of hers and corrected herself quickly. "I'm so happy to meet you. Yes, I'm Jenny Taylor, William Small." To her surprise, he took the hand she held out and bowed down over it. His forehead nearly brushed her knuckles, and the way he lifted his eyes to meet hers from such a position had May completely forgetting about the wintry breeze that swept over the platform. "It's so wonderful to finally meet you. Can I take your bag?" "That's all right," May insisted automatically. "I've got it." "I'm more than happy to help." His hand brushed against hers as he easily transferred the heavy valise into his hand. The weight of it didn't even sag his shoulder. "It looks as though the handle is starting to come off." That was because the valise had fallen off the back of a cart, and May had been lucky enough to scoop it up and dive into an alley before anyone had noticed. George had been disappointed that it hadn't held anything of more value than some cheap combs and a few bits of clothing that weren't in George's size, but May had transformed every bit of it into something of use. "Yes, I need to repair it." "We can stop in at the general store and see if they have a new one you like," William offered kindly, holding out his elbow. "There's plenty of time yet before it gets dark, although I do have to say the children are very excited to meet you." May swallowed hard as she slipped her hand into the crook of his elbow. That's right. There were children, Jonathan and Camilla. William had mentioned them in his letters more than once. If she agreed to go to the general store, William might insist that she transfer her meager belongings to the new valise. Then he'd see just how poor she was. But heading straight back to his ranch meant that she'd be diving into this whole new world, meeting his children and carrying on the charade. Neither one seemed like a good option, but the former seemed the most embarrassing. I'm not worried about the valise for now. They'd come around the train station, and William settled her valise into the back of a waiting wagon. He frowned as he turned to her. You don't have a coat. Oh, the only coat in her possession had been far too ratty for someone who was well off enough to travel so far on her own, and so she'd left it behind at their tenement. I'm afraid it got misplaced during the trip, but it's not a problem. It's going to be. The wind out here will cut through you like a knife, especially once we get outside of town. May didn't want to risk that offer of going to the general store again. I don't mind the cold. You're shivering? He pointed out as he began unbuttoning his duster. I'm fine, really. The rest of her protests faded away as he settled the heavy duster around her shoulders. It was thick and warm, and her chilled muscles instantly relaxed as they thawed. May didn't think she'd been that warm in months. Thank you. Of course, Miss Taylor. Anything of mine is yours. He stared down at her, his brows meeting as he blinked. Uncertainty crossed his features, and May's heart bumped against her ribcage. Your eyes? What about them? I could have sworn you said that they were brown. Jenny was the one with brown eyes. May had the McKinley blue eyes. Her stomach plummeted when she saw that her ruse would be tripped at the first hurdle. May instinctively did what she always did when caught in a lie. She'd brazen it out. Goodness, did I? She laughed and stepped back from him. My mama always said I was a slowpoke, Mr. Small. I don't know why I'd write such a thing when my eyes are so blue. William laughed along with her. Well, they're a lovely color. And please, we're to be married. It's William. He helped her up into the wagon and then settled onto the seat beside her. May pulled her hands up into the sleeves of the duster, using it for the protection it provided, but knowing that she couldn't really luxuriate in it. She'd spent most of her life learning how to deceive people. Sometimes that meant she had to impersonate a higher-class lady so that nobody would question the parts of the city she frequented. Other times, it meant pretending to accidentally bump into someone just so she could slip a package out of their hands or their money out of their pockets. With a lump in her throat, May realized this was no different from the way she'd been living back in New York. Except for this time, she'd deceived someone who was kind and generous. Yes, William had been writing to Jenny because he needed a wife, and there was no doubt that anyone he married would be expected to perform all the grueling tasks of keeping a household. But the fact remained that she wasn't Jenny. Guilt swamped her, and she knew she'd made a huge mistake. Now, though, as the horses surged forward and they headed through the unfamiliar and strange-looking town, she had no idea how she could possibly fix it. Chapter 4. William woke up the next morning to howling winds and the icy blast of snow against his window. He swung his legs over the edge of the mattress to get a better look, but the glass had been completely frosted over. It was going to be a hard day's graft out on the ranch. It wasn't, however, going to be a difficult day in other terms. His feet were light as he slipped them into his boots because his household was finally getting back into order. Already he could hear Jenny down in the kitchen, lighting the fire and preparing breakfast. It was a little bit later than he'd have preferred, but he'd have to give her some time to get used to how things worked around there. As he came down into the kitchen, he realized that he wouldn't mind waiting around a little bit for his breakfast at all if it meant he got to look at Jenny a little longer. Camilla had been concerned about whether her new mother would be pretty, and it turned out she was far prettier than William had imagined. He liked the long lines of her face and her wide blue eyes. Good morning. She was at the stove, fiddling with the flue, and she jerked upright at his entrance. Good morning. I didn't mean to startle you, he chuckled. I'm always up early. I have a lot of chores to do on a ranch like this." Jenny twisted her hands in her apron for a moment. Then she glanced at the stove, startled again as though she'd forgotten it was there, and reached for a nearby pan. "I suppose you do." He crossed the room to the window. The fire from the kitchen had taken the frost off the glass, and he could see now just how much the winter weather had settled in. The snowflakes that had fallen were light and fluffy, but they'd piled up against the buildings and around the fence posts. The cows were huddled in the barn, and even the path that led out through the yard was completely invisible under a layer of white. "I'd hoped that we could get to the church today, but it doesn't look like we're going anywhere at the moment. We'll have to wait until the road's clear before we can get married. I'm sorry." A cloud of flour rose up from her workspace. "That's all right." He raised an eyebrow. "I'd have thought you'd be more upset than that. You said yourself that you weren't very practical, and I think most women who find out their wedding day has been botched by the weather would probably break down in tears." She rolled a shoulder. "I wouldn't want to get stuck in the snow." William sat down in one of the kitchen chairs and studied her. Her hair had been pinned back carelessly, and a strand of it fell down over her cheek as she tried to adjust the temperature of the oven. "You know, your hair is much lighter than the way you described it in your letters." Not that he minded. He rather liked the blonde coloring of it, and on the wagon ride home, he'd seen the way it lit up in the sunshine. She didn't look at him as she began transferring biscuits onto a pan. "I guess I'm not very good at describing things." Had she thought perhaps William would prefer her if she had darker hair since he'd mentioned his own? He liked to think not, but he decided not to press the issue. It was obvious he was already making Jenny nervous, so it was best to stick to something she knew. "I wouldn't say that. You described your job at the hotel quite well. I felt as though I knew the place, even though I've never been to New York City. I particularly liked that little anecdote you shared about having an incident while trying to get the ashes emptied out of one of the fireplaces." "Oh yes, when I spilled them on the carpet." 7%. Jenny gave him a cursory smile before she grabbed a strip of bacon with her thumb and forefinger and laid it gingerly onto a griddle. "That was a mess. I was talking about when you said the door latch got stuck behind you when you went outside to dump the ashes, and you had to come around through the lobby. You said the manager was furious." Jenny's mouth tightened for just a fraction of a second, but she kept her focus on the bacon. "Yes, well, there are quite a few times I had to deal with those ashes." "Really? I'd gotten the impression from your letters that you were making beds and sweeping floors most of the time." William wondered why he made her so jittery. Jenny had sounded so excited about coming out west, exploring the ranch, and becoming his wife. She hadn't expressed a single sign of doubt in her letters, and yet her shoulders were hunched so tightly under her dress that they were beginning to bunch up near her ears. As for that, the dress itself wasn't exactly what he'd have expected of a woman who'd been making her own way in the world by working in a hotel. They'd never have let her wear something with such worn hems, but he'd have that fixed soon enough. A trip to the general store was going to be in order at some point. Even if Jenny had been too eager to get to the ranch yesterday, he wondered if it was because he was offering to help. He'd read about some women liking to be independent, but it wasn't a feeling he'd picked up in her letters. Jenny claimed to want a simple life away from the city. There were a lot of maids, William. Our duties changed quite a bit, and we all had a lot of work to do. Rosella made her way into the kitchen just then, holding her hand to her lower back. "I didn't even have to look out the window to tell you how much it's snowing out there today. I can feel it in my bones. What's that burning smell?" Jenny's eyes widened to the size of saucers as her shoulders stiffened. She quickly spun and yanked open the oven door, sending a cloud of smoke big enough to signal the next ranch whirling into the room. "I'm sorry, the biscuits have burned. We'll just have to cut the bottoms off." That's a very pragmatic approach. Despite the chill, William opened a window to let some of the smoke out. He spotted the meaningful look his mother gave him from across the room and resigned himself to it, following her out of the kitchen and into the study. "I thought you said she was a good cook," Rosella noted as soon as they were alone. William shook his head. "That's what she told me, but I'm sure she's just nervous. It's not our place to judge." "I'm not judging. I'm just saying that perhaps she wasn't completely honest in her letters. I liked the girl from the moment you brought her home last night, but I'm starting to wonder if she tried to make herself sound better so you'd agree to bring her out here," Rosella explained, casting an uncertain eye back toward the kitchen. William was having some doubts himself, though he'd not admit these to his mother. She could be like a terrier when she thought there was news afoot. The woman in his letters had struck him as a person who appreciated being taken care of by a man. After all, in her job, she was around wealth every day. He'd made a promise to himself that he would make her comfortable and show her that she'd not made a mistake in coming to live here with him. He wanted to prove to her that he had some wealth behind him, and yet she'd declined to have her broken valise replaced. She had been so appreciative of his worn and battered duster after losing her coat. A woman who was used to working in a fine New York hotel wouldn't have walked into his rustic home and stared at it as though she'd found paradise. There could be a good reason for it. We don't know how bad things might have been for her back in New York. Jenny seems kind enough, and I'm sure she's just getting used to things here. Rosella's lower lip pushed up with doubt, but she nodded. "I only want you to be happy." Chapter 5. May's shoulders sagged with relief when she saw the dark form of William in his duster and hat heading out across the yard to check on the cattle. She hadn't expected him to simply show up in the kitchen that morning, and his presence had made her struggle even worse. This dratted oven was far too complicated. She'd only ever put a pot on top of the potbelly stove back in their tenement and tossed in whatever was available. May knew she should be grateful to have such a wonderful thing in the kitchen, especially this far out west. But right this moment, she felt as though it was conspiring against her. Now that William was gone, she could go about attempting the rest of her housekeeping duties without his supervision, not to mention all those looks he was giving her. She hadn't missed the sparkle in his eyes or the way he kept asking her about herself. If this was any other situation, May might have been flattered. In fact, she might have been incredibly satisfied with herself to find that a strong, handsome man, one who earned an honest living, could have an interest in her. She pressed her teeth together as she tried to scrape the burned parts of the biscuits off the pan. How long could she keep this charade going? Thunder sounded on the stairwell, and a moment later Jonathan burst into the kitchen with Camilla on his heels. "Do I smell bacon?" May couldn't stop the smile on her face. There was something about these two children that had charmed her right away. Perhaps it was the daring look in Jonathan's eyes, the one that reminded her so very much of how George had always looked when they were younger. And dear Camilla, a sweet little thing who hovered shyly behind her brother but so obviously wanted to be front and center. May made a dramatic play in trying to hide the platters of crispy meat with her body, spreading her arms and legs wide. "Nope, Sairee, nothing to see here." Jonathan's eyes lit up in challenge, and he grinned at her before charging at her. They wrestled for a few moments, and then May gave in. "Okay, I surrender. You're too strong for me, master." "I thought as much, and now for my treasure." Jonathan cackled and descended upon the tray. May caught hold of his wrist and pointed at the table. "It's not all for you. Do you like bacon?" May asked as she fetched 2 more plates out of the hutch. "What's not to like?" Jonathan took his seat at the table. Camilla sat down across from him. He'd eat it every day if he could. This earned her a dirty look from her brother, which she ignored. "It's nice and crispy," May said with a faint smile, hoping that the children wouldn't have any complaints to report to their father. She'd thought for sure that William would question her directly about her cooking skills. Based on his letters, she'd already gathered that Jenny had bragged about her talent in the kitchen. May only wished that she knew how to replicate it. She wouldn't have been surprised in the least if William had turned her out into the snow earlier when she'd set his plate in front of him. Instead, he'd taken his biscuit with the bottom cut off, spread a hearty dollop of butter on it, and eaten it without a further word. Camilla was watching her closely, even as she bit into her bacon. "Are you and Daddy getting married today?" May wondered if she'd ever again be able to relax. This wasn't a sham she was keeping up for just a few minutes, long enough to snag a loaf of bread from the baker. This was an entire lifetime she'd just committed herself to, and the mention of the impending marriage only reminded her of it. Shame washed over her once again. It's healing. May took a fraction of a second to remember all she'd left behind and immediately decided she could only forge ahead. "I'm afraid we can't today because of the snow. Your father said we'd need to wait." Camilla turned her sweet little face toward the window. "Does that mean we won't be able to have Christmas?" Christmas? May had nearly forgotten. She'd seen all the evergreen wreaths on doors and the various gifts displayed in shop windows. For her, it had meant only that people carried around more money and parcels and gave her better opportunities to swipe high-quality items at this time of year. Now she had children to care for, and her chest tightened. She had no idea how to go about any of this. She had no memories of how Christmas should be celebrated. What she knew she'd heard about secondhand from the families crammed into the tenement when they reminisced of times gone by. "What kind of things do you like to do for Christmas?" Jonathan took a biscuit from the platter in the middle of the table and frowned at it before putting it on his plate. His frown then transferred to May. "Decorations, of course. It doesn't feel like Christmas without decorations." "But we don't have any," Camilla reminded her brother. Her doe eyes turned to May. "We had a tree one time. Christmas makes Daddy sad, so Grandma said we should pray to the Lord and be grateful for what we have." "But decorations help us pray," Jonathan chimed in around the bacon meat crammed into his mouth. "Don't talk with your mouth full," May murmured absently as she rubbed a hand over his dark hair. She turned back to the sink located under the window. She didn't like to think of kind William Small being in pain over his lost wife. Worse still was thinking about these sweet children missing their mother. She knew that pain only too well. If only she could help ease their pain just a little. Her eyes roamed the wintry scene beyond the glass. Snow tumbled from the sky, sitting on the boughs of fir trees. It was perfectly unspoiled. She'd only ever seen indoor trees through the windows of the grand hotels. Her eyes moved back to the trees. May had lain awake most of the night in the upstairs room William had given to her until their wedding day. Her back was stiff and her eyes were tired, and she'd been certain that she'd fall asleep over the stove. But a sense of determination suddenly straightened her spine as she was struck by an idea. Chapter 6. She turned back to the children. "There are decorations all over this place." Jonathan jerked his head from side to side, looking around the kitchen. "Where? I don't see anything." "Silly boy." She tapped her finger on the end of his nose, a gesture that left him blinking in surprise. "You two go upstairs and put on your warmest clothes, then come back down here and I'll show you." He started to get up from the table, but then he glanced at the sink and paused. "Don't you have to clean all of that up first?" May had to wonder if he was testing her, but she shooed him toward the doorway. "I'll worry about that later. Go on now. Don't forget your hats and your mittens." A short time later, the three of them were out trudging through the snow. "I don't see any decorations out here either. That's just because you're not looking at it the right way." May walked over to a large pine tree, one whose branches grew nice and close to the ground. "Camilla, why don't you use that basket I gave you and start filling it with these pine cones? Then we'll cut down some of the boughs." Now even Jonathan was starting to get enthusiastic. "We're going to need a knife." "I've already gone one." May had come out prepared, and she easily cut off a thick and fluffy green spur. The boy looked at the branch in her hand and then back up at her. "You're actually strong." She laughed as she tugged his hat back down over his ears before he caught a chill. May had to be strong. She'd been working hard her entire life, fighting just to scrape by. But out here, with the fresh wind rolling through the hills and snowflakes whirling down around them, she only felt grateful that she could impress this doubtful little boy. "I suppose I am, but I think this would be a wonderful job for you." He took the knife she offered, moving among the little grove of trees as they filled their arms with evergreens. Jonathan pressed the tip of his tongue into the corner of his mouth as he worked, and soon enough he was grinning from ear to ear. Back in the house, with the evergreens piled on a rug and dropping their needles, Camilla frowned. There was a trail of twigs and tree debris littering the floor where they'd walked into the living room. Puddles of water collected where the snow had melted. What do we do with all of this? May hated to see that devastated look on her face, but she knew she could fix it. Just wait and see. Do you have any ribbon or string that we can use? She looked doubtful, but she ran to fetch a sewing box. Would this work? It certainly would. Let's start a piece for the mantle. All we have to do is tie the branches together like this. May grabbed 2 of the branches. Camilla hung back slightly. Aren't you worried about ruining your dress? Glancing down, May shook her head. It was the only dress she owned besides that beautiful blue wool one, which she'd already decided she had to save for church and special occasions. Oh no, if I worried about ruining this, why then I'd never do anything. As the mantelpiece trimming began to come together, Camilla started to get excited. Can we tie pine cones on there too? Of course we can. Why don't you pick out some ones you like? The little girl was down on her knees, digging through the basket. And can we put a ribbon in there? A pretty piece of red? I think that's a lovely idea. Jonathan had finally finished tugging off his boots. What can I do? May looked around the room. Fetch that big vase out of the hutch. You can make a centerpiece for the table. You can. With the mantle and the centerpiece done, May set the children to arrange a nice long piece of garland for the banister while she worked on a wreath for the front door. She hummed to herself as the scent of the sticky pine sap rose to her nostrils, fresh and clean. This was a life she could only have imagined. How did you learn to do that? Camilla was standing on the 3rd stair, holding a branch while her brother carefully tied it in place. What's that? May found a long piece of blue ribbon to make a bow. Make a wreath, the girl explained, or the garland. Did someone teach you? Oh, May pressed her lips together. She'd spent a winter long ago watching one of the old women in the tenement building making such items for her granddaughter to sell on the streets. Of course, May had tried to emulate these pieces, but George had busted a button over her wasting money trying to earn an honest coin. He'd forbidden her from ever doing such a crazy thing ever again. She was to steal, nothing more. But she'd not forgotten how amazed she'd been at watching the old woman create such pretty things. A neighbor taught me when I was small. She said I was a quick learner. Can you make cookies? Jonathan asked as he snipped the string. We've got to have cookies. The light-hearted feeling that May had been enjoying was quickly swept away. The kitchen would prove to be her undoing. She was sure of it. She couldn't possibly disappoint these children, though. It wasn't their fault that she'd stolen someone else's future. I think we can give it a try just as soon as we're done here. A short time later, with the house full of evergreens, May and the children sat at the kitchen table. Several batches of gingerbread had been shaped and baked, and they worked on the remaining dough. May was grateful for the recipe book she'd found on a shelf, but she knew the creation they were making was far from perfect. Some of the cookies were too crisp on one side, and most of them were a bit lumpy. The children didn't seem to mind as they pressed raisins into the dough to make little faces. Mine's going to be a happy gingerbread man, Camilla declared. Of course it is, Jonathan sneered. There's nothing wrong with being nice, May reminded him. They continued their work, but May noticed that Camilla's shoulders were hunched. She was sagging down toward the table, and she'd rearranged her raisins into a frown. What's the matter? Mama used to make cookies with us at Christmas time, she said quietly. All the happiness they'd found had been sucked out of the room. May saw that even the plucky Jonathan had been quickly subdued, and she couldn't blame him. She carefully put aside the cookies she was working on. The 2 of you miss her very much, don't you? Camilla nodded, and Jonathan only looked at the floor. When May had first arrived from the train station and William had introduced her to his children, she'd easily been able to see the fear, doubt, and concern on their faces. That night, She'd heard them talking in their room well after the lamps had been put out. Jonathan had claimed that he hadn't wanted his pa to remarry, but that May had seemed okay for a girl. Camilla had said the newcomer was pretty, but that she missed Mama. May wouldn't dare tell them that she'd overheard this conversation, but she could certainly sympathize. You know, my mother died when I was young. Camilla's eyes, shining with tears, grew wide. She did? Jonathan put his elbows on the table and picked at his fingernail. Did your father marry someone new? No, actually. May cleared her throat. She'd never really talked about it very much. And the person. George had preferred to leave the past alone, as there was nothing that they could do to bring either of their parents back. He passed away a short time later. I miss them both very much, but I tried to remember that they were with the Lord in a much happier place. Were you sad? Camilla inched a little closer on the bench. When she passed away? May's heart shattered as she put her arm around her. I was, and sometimes I still am. But Camilla's lip pouted in ponderance. You're a grown-up. Just because I'm older doesn't mean I don't get sad or lonely or upset, you know? I used to talk to my mama. Someone once told me Ma was an angel and that now she was in heaven, I could talk to her anytime I want. She held back the memory of when George had laughed at her innocent claims about their mother still being with them. Camilla's eyes were shiny. Do you think Mama is an angel too? May pressed her cheek to the little girl's crown. Why, most certainly, Miss Camilla. The Lord loves us all, even the people who sin and ask for forgiveness. She could only hope that that was true after all the badness in her life so far. I think she is too, Camilla said quietly. It's important to find ways to be happy, even when it's hard. Jonathan was sliding down in his chair now. Graham said that's why you're here, to make Pa happy. There was that guilt again. I hope that I can, but I also hope that we can all learn to be happy together. I don't want you to think that I'm here to replace your mama. I know she was special to you, and I wouldn't want to change that. Oh. Jonathan sat up a little straighter and grabbed a few pieces of walnut to make the buttons on his gingerbread man. Camilla was rearranging her raisins into a smile again. Did your mama make cookies with you at Christmas? Well, May trailed off as she tried to remember. She'd been so young when her parents had gone, and they'd been sick for a long time. Had the holidays ever been happy times with decorations, cookies, and carols? May could only recall worried discussions, cold droughts, and standing in the charity lines. Children, did you make cookies? Rosella asked from the doorway. May met the older woman's unreadable gaze and tried to recall what she'd been talking about to the children. Had she let anything that might give her away slip? She quickly moved away from Camilla and returned to the stove. I hope you don't mind, Rosella, May said over her shoulder. We used one of your recipe books. Rosella shuffled into the kitchen, her eyes meandering over the chaos before her. Flour and cookie dough dotted every surface. Pine needles covered the floor, and the contents of her sewing box spewed out. May didn't have to look at the other woman's face to know that she'd messed up. You've had quite the morning, I see. She was saved from having to answer when the door opened, bringing in a dusting of snow and a blast of cold wind. William stamped his feet to shake off the last of the snow. It's a cold one out there. We might have a few days more of being snowed in. What's that smell? Why can I smell pine? And cookies! Camilla jumped off the bench with one of the baked cookies in her hand and pressed it toward her father. Try one, and spoil my supper. But William took the treat and bit into it eagerly. May's cheeks reddened. Once again, she'd have to find some way to explain herself, as she knew they couldn't be any better than her attempt at biscuits. Oh, these are terrible, William said. He put the remainder of the cookie in his mouth and reached for the plate that held a pile of the baked ones. Prosody. I'll have to take all the rest of these and eat them for you, so you won't have to go through the torture. Daddy, no, Camilla giggled. He laughed as he tweaked the other braid. They're wonderful, darling. We also decorated the house, Jonathan enthused. William's gaze traveled to the pine needles on the floor next to the pile of wet boots, then to the growing heap of dirty pans and dishes, and then to his children's smiling faces. Finally, his eyes landed on May. Busy day? Her cheeks flushed even brighter now as she realized just what he must mean. The house was a mess, and she'd spent all her time entertaining the children and decorating instead of cooking and cleaning. The snow had kept them from getting married, and so her position here was still an uncertain one. She ducked her head. "Yes, we have. Come on, you must come and see the house." Jonathan and Camilla were now each tugging him by the hands toward the front of the house. As soon as they were out of the kitchen, May was on her feet and tackling the dishes. Chapter 7. I wish we could go with you. Camilla sat on the very edge of May's bed, fiddling with her doll. I want to see you get married. Not for the first time that morning, May's stomach jumped around inside her at the very idea of marrying William Small. She knew that a marriage certificate would secure her place here, and that was exactly what she needed if she didn't want to risk being out on the streets or back in New York City. The home was lovely, and even though the winters here were just as cold as what she was used to, she had warm blankets and a cozy fireplace. The spate of snowstorms had meant that her wedding to William Small had been delayed by more than a week. Even when May had attended her first church service, the sermon had been taken by the judge because the pastor was stranded in one of the towns he ministered to. The weather had dominated the conversations of the townsfolks. Trains had been delayed and supplies were dwindling. Still, it had allowed May to find a rhythm in her work at the ranch. There was still so very much to do, but she felt that she had a handle on most things, except that dreaded stove that seemed to hate her. In the days that she'd spent here on William's ranch, she'd also become rather attached to the children. That was both a wonderful thing and a terrible one. May knew she could easily raise these children as her own. But how could she morally do that when she knew that every day her life was a lie? The longer she stayed here, the worse things became. How could she raise them to be good Christians when she herself had been lying the entire time? Here she had a life where she could truly be happy, and yet she couldn't have the one thing that she wanted above all else, to be herself. She'd wanted to live a truthful and honest woman, to be a good wife to such a respectable man as William was, to watch the children grow up. None of them deserved to be lied to. The stress of being caught out in a lie was taking its toll, and she was having to carefully edit herself. The weather had been a blessing and a curse. It had shown her the life she could have, yet all the while she'd known that she would eventually have to stand up in the house of the Lord and lie. The very thought made her nauseous. She glanced out the window, wishing another blizzard would come so that she didn't have to be faced with all this today. May twisted up a lock of her hair and pinned it in place. Your father is concerned about having all of us out on the road, and rightfully so. Most of the snow has melted, but there will still be plenty of hazards. He wants you to stay here with your grandmother. You look very pretty in your dress, Camilla said quietly. I think the navy blue looks nice on you. I wish I had one like it. May looked at her reflection in the mirror and saw Camilla there behind her. The girl was so dear and sweet. She was already heartbroken over the death of her mother. How much more heartbroken would she be if she ever found out how May had deceived her? The very dress she wore was a reminder of just how deceptive she'd been. When we're in town, I'll ask your father if perhaps we can go by the general store and see if they have any nice blue wool. Then we can make you one of your very own. The little girl's eyes widened. Do you know how to do that? While May wouldn't consider herself the finest seamstress in the world, she'd certainly had to learn her way around a needle and thread. Over the years, she'd altered lots of the pinched clothing to fit her and George. She'd even adjusted the dresses of the tenement residents for a coin when George wasn't looking. The clothes she'd found in the valise she'd purloined had looked like nothing, yet she'd managed to tailor them into usable items. I think I can do well enough. Camilla had now forgotten about the rejection of not going on the wedding trip, and her eyes were bright again. I want to learn how to sew. As ready as she could possibly be for the day, May rose from her seat in front of the vanity. She went to the small sewing box she'd brought along with her from New York. I'll tell you what, I can show you a very easy stitch to practice, and you can work on it while I'm gone today. Do you have one of your handkerchiefs?" "Yes." Camilla dashed off to her room and returned a moment later. "Will this one work?" "Perfect." May took the plain square of cloth and laid it in her lap while she threaded a needle. "This stitch is going to put a pretty little edge on your hanky. We'll tie a knot here to get it started and hold it in place. Then you want to make sure you're always coming through from the same side, like this. Bring your needle up, pull it through this little loop, and then start again." She demonstrated several blanket stitches while Camilla snuggled up next to her on the edge of the mattress, watching with fascination. "Can I try?" "Of course." May handed over the project and guided her as she took the first few stitches. "You're already doing wonderfully. I'll be excited to see what you've done when I come back." "Jenny, I've got the cart ready," William called from downstairs. Though she'd much rather have sat up here and sewn with Camilla all day, May knew that wasn't one of her options. "Coming." After bidding the children and Rosella goodbye and promising they'd be back as soon as they could, the two of them set off. The ranch grew smaller and smaller in her vision until she couldn't see it all anymore, and it soon felt as though they were completely alone in the wilderness. "You're very quiet today," William noted. "Are you cold?" He'd given her one of his coats, the same one she'd borrowed when she and the children had gone out into the snow. May shook her head. "No, I'm fine, thank you." "I wish you'd let me buy you a coat. That one almost drowns you." She settled deeper into the softly worn leather. "I like this one. It smells like you." His wide eyes told her that she'd surprised him. Well, golly. May worried her lower lip with her teeth. Jenny probably wouldn't have said something as shocking. "Sorry, that was uncouth of me." William's eyes returned to the road. "It's okay. It's been a while since a woman has worn my clothing. I must get used to it again." May shuddered out a breath. "I've made you uncomfortable." William sent her a smile. "No. I like that you are happy with that, though it's hardly high fashion, and I'm more than sure you won't like how I smell come next summertime." May couldn't help the gurgle of laughter that his comment brought forth, and she relaxed a little more. She'd never known anyone who could coax a laugh from her like William seemed to be able to. "Are you nervous? I understand most brides are on their wedding day." Nervous didn't even begin to describe the way she felt. Her guts were twisted inside her. May had sinned so many times, and up until now, she'd always been able to justify them because they were a means of survival. She could try to account for her current deception the same way, but not when William and the children were the ones that she'd taken advantage of. They were people she'd come to care for so deeply in such a short time. "William, you've been so very kind to me since I arrived here." Healandy. He let out one of his hearty laughs, something she'd heard more and more often since she'd first met him. The sound made her pulse skip a little, and she felt her lips twitch in response. "Did you expect anything else?" She swallowed as she tried to find the right words. One never really knows what sort of situation they might find themselves in. "I suppose that's true," he acknowledged. "But both of us took a risk with this arrangement. What good would it do for either one of us to be anything but kind and generous?" He wasn't making this any easier. May knew she had to tell him the truth. She couldn't enter into a marriage and make promises before God when everything about her was a lie. William didn't even know her real name. But how could she look up into that gentle, handsome face and tell him so? She realized with a sudden shock that they were no longer surrounded by ranches and pastures. The road had turned to the town street, lined with the blacksmith, the farrier, the general store, and the hotel. The church steeple reached into the sky. They were close, too close. May closed her eyes, and the action sent tears streaking down her cheeks. "William, I don't think I can do this." Chapter 8. She felt his eyes on her when he turned to stare. "Do what?" "Get married." "Don't you want to?" She moved her head to meet his stare head-on. She could see bewilderment behind his kind eyes, and it made her heart crack a little. "Yes, I really do," she confessed. Relief pushed a breath out of him. "I'm just as nervous as you are, Jenny." He covered her gloved hand with his. "And that's perfectly natural." Hearing the other woman's name in his mouth was like salt in the wound. May shook her head. You don't understand. There's no easy way to tell you this, William. My name. There you are. She snapped her head forward as William was forced to yank the cart to an unsteady halt. A man had leaped in front of them, his blue eyes blazing. Watch what you're doing, William bellowed at the man, his attention on controlling his spooked horse. But May could only stare as her brother stomped around to her side of the wagon. Horror froze her far more than the chill wind. George, what are you doing here? I should ask you the same thing. He held out his hand and gestured at her. Get down from there right this instant. William lay a protective hand over May. She's not going anywhere, sir, and I'd thank you not to make demands on my fiancé. George clapped his hands together. Oh, good. Affianced still, which means there's still time for me to fix this. Down you come. Do you realize the trouble you've caused me? She could see just how angry her brother was, and she ducked her head, unable to move because of William's restraining arm. Jenny, do you know this man? George laughed. Oh, you've done a job on him, haven't you, May? Perhaps I taught you a little too well. William straightened in his seat. Hold on a moment. His arm loosened his hold, and George was quick to haul her off the bench. William's booted feet hit the ground just as hers did, and he quickly came around to the other side of the horses to wrap a firm hand around May's elbow. I think you're mistaken, sir. This is Jenny Taylor. No, the mistake was my sister thinking that she could run away from me. George turned and pointed to the front of the train station just behind him. That is Jenny Taylor. This is May McKinley. May opened her mouth to explain, to find a way to defend her heinous actions, but the words froze in her throat when she looked at William. Suspicion narrowed his eyes as his attention moved between the two women. You're not Jenny? May forced herself to hold his gaze, though she longed to take away the hurt that she was causing him. She could only shake her head. His shoulders sagged in disappointment. His fingers slipped away from her elbow, and she felt the loss of contact keenly. At that moment, May understood that he knew exactly what she'd done. It was one thing to steal from the rich back in New York City, but she'd committed a crime that was unforgivable in his eyes. He looked over to where Jenny was standing, and May saw the way he was looking at the true author of those letters. Brown eyes, dark hair, he murmured. He let loose a mirthless laugh and took a step away from her. William. She managed to squeak out, but he moved out of her reach. You tricked me. She'd been able to talk herself out of plenty of sticky situations over the years, and she tried to summon that same courage she'd had when she'd been living in the slums. His eyes searched her face for the truth. Your brother is right. You did a good job. I excused away all those differences because I suppose you were laughing up your deceitful sleeve. Piece a day. I'll tell you what I've been able to piece together, George said, taking the lead as he always did. He was either ignoring or oblivious to the undercurrents of unspoken emotion moving between the pair. For once, May wished that her brother would shut up, but she knew that she'd never get a word in edgeways when he had an audience. George summoned Jenny, who'd been watching from a short distance away. This is Jenny Taylor, the woman that you've been writing to. You sent her a train ticket, but my sister here decided to take that ticket for herself. I would have been here sooner, but the trains were delayed somewhat, George hedged. May knew that it would have taken her brother a day or two to be able to steal what he needed to buy a ticket. That's if he bothered with such a thing in the first place. William's jaw tightened. Is this true? Tears swam across her vision, but she forced them back. She wouldn't cry. Not here and not now. George had boiled it all down to such plain and simple terms, without considering the miserable life she'd lived back in New York City and how desperate she'd been to get away. He hadn't explained how they'd fought tooth and nail their entire lives just to survive. Essentially, though, he was right. Yes, I'm afraid it is. George turned squarely to William, triumph shining on his face. I'm very sorry that you've had to deal with my sister's antics. She can get a little headstrong, though. It's in the McKinley blood, so you can't blame her for that. Only the Lord knows that I tried my best to raise her right. George winked at William as though he should understand. Fresh shame washed over her when she saw the way William was looking at her brother. His clothing was worn and stained. He looked just like a devious street dealer. Maybe it's because our parents died when we were young, George continued. Look, I've delivered you your real fiancé. No harm, no foul, though it's going to cost a fortune to get back east. I don't suppose you could see your way to. May slapped at her brother before he could ask William for money. No, George. George checked himself and shrugged. Fine, right. Come on, May. Let's leave these two lovebirds to get acquainted, shall we? Jenny cast an angry look toward May before she held her hand out toward William. It's very nice to meet you. The rancher reached out and clasped her fingers politely with a small nod. You as well. I'm sorry about all of this. Yes. His eyes slid to May again and lingered there for a moment, tracing the hank of blonde hair that had escaped from her cap once again. So am I. May McKinley, you've outdone yourself this time, Jenny scolded her. Shame burned May's cheeks. She was the only one who had to be sorry. There were 1,000 apologies she would need to issue, but she didn't even know how to begin. There were too many things to say. You're right, Jenny. I'm so very sorry. A likely story, Jenny interrupted her apology. William, did I hear you say you'd not yet wed this liar? William cleared his throat. That's right. Well, thank goodness for small mercies, Jenny muttered and handed her valise to William. You can put this in the cart thingy, and once we're wed, we can put this whole sorry mess behind us. William automatically accepted the case that was presented to him, his gaze downcast. Very well. Jenny lifted her nose in the air, glaring at May. You've caused a whole lot of upset, May, and William, I declare that you've had a lucky, lucky escape. You have no idea what this woman is capable of. Prosody retin. I've already got some rooms for us at the hotel, George said, tugging May's arm. Let's go before this is any more awkward than it already is. May swallowed as she walked along with him. She could hear the disparaging remarks that Jenny was spouting. She dared to turn her head, doing so just in time to see William helping Jenny up into the cart. Jenny, who would now have the life that she so desperately wanted for herself. It was no longer a fantastical idea of starting over and getting out of the overcrowded city. And it wasn't just the general notion of a husband and children. It was William. It was Jonathan and Camilla. It was a nice home with clean air and warm blankets. It was Rosella, who had watched May with a gimlet eye, but also had been content to step back and let May run the household as she wished. Wait a moment. She twisted her arm out of George's grip. Don't you think you've caused enough of a scene? He reminded her through gritted teeth. We're going to let them get on with their lives, just as they were going to do before you interfered. The nagging thought at the back of her mind had renewed all that courage she couldn't find a few moments before, and she turned on her heel. I won't be but a minute. May reached the side of the cart just before William prepared to pull away. Please wait. Anger simmered on his face. May thought she saw something else there too, but she couldn't figure out what it was. What is it? Camilla, May began. Before we left the ranch, I'd promised her a new dress, a blue one in wool. Please, I know that I've wronged you, but I don't want to let her down. William adjusted his grip on the reins, and his mouth tightened. I'll see to it. Thank you. Ignoring the icy glare from Jenny, May stepped back. She watched as William guided the wagon back toward the general store, feeling colder and more alone than she'd ever been in her life. Chapter 9. I can't believe you did this. George paced the length of the hotel room. His face was a deep red, and his blonde hair stuck up from running his fingers through it several times. This is a whole new level, even for you, May. She'd had to listen to his raving agitation ever since the hotel room door had closed behind them. The interior was modest, and not for the first time. She wondered how he was paying for this. A small fire simmered in the hearth, and she wondered if the fire at the ranch was roaring, or if it had died down as this one had. She reached her hands out to the heat source, though wasn't sure she'd ever feel warm again. Are you even listening to me? George demanded. May sighed. I'm sure the people in the bar can hear you just fine, too. This is not the time to be flippant. Do you have any idea how much trouble you caused me, having to come all this way to save your sorry behind? May swung her astonished gaze up. To save me? Yes. What if Jenny had fetched the sheriff to your door? What then? He retorted, turning and pacing in the other direction. Stealing the train ticket, I can understand. It's worth some value, and we've stolen plenty of other things in our lives. But to take it from someone who is our neighbor. I know, George. I know that what I did was wrong, but I don't think you understand just how wrong it was. He finally stopped, bracing his hands on his hips as he looked down at his sister. When Jenny informed me that the ticket was missing and so were you, there was only one conclusion to draw. I denied her accusations. McKinleys have a code we don't take from just anyone. May stared at her brother. All those years of telling her that they had to fight for everything, that no one else would help them. And now he had a code? I thought Jenny was a friend, May. I was horrified that you'd done that to her, but I thought surely you were trading the ticket for something much more useful to the two of us. Just imagine my surprise when I discovered that everything else you owned was gone, and there was no sign of you anywhere. She'd occasionally seen him on one of these tirades. It happened when there was something he was feeling particularly passionate about. And May knew that she usually couldn't get a word in. Even if he was directly asking for her opinion, he tended to speak over her. She couldn't help but compare his wild temper to William's calm attitude, but she knew she had to shake that right out of her head. She would never see William again. George, the way that we've been living, I know it's not always easy, but we've been making it. We've been doing better, and I had plans for our future. Don't think I didn't, May. We were going to get out of the slums. If you thought Jenny's train ticket might be the one thing that could get us there, then I suppose I can't even blame you for that. But to become someone else, to travel all the way out here to Colorado and just pretend you're Jenny, it's inconceivable. Did you see the look on Mr. Small's face once he understood the truth? I did, and she very much wished that she hadn't. He was hurt, and rightfully so. May hadn't been able to stop thinking about it. She'd done something terrible, even if she had the right motivation behind it. She'd hurt everyone around her, including all the lovely people who were new to her life. Poor Jonathan and Camilla. What were they going to do? How would they feel? George crossed to the window and braced himself on the sill. I was so relieved when we found you because I thought we never would. You never even left me a note, May. I had no idea where you were or what state I should be looking in. At one time, she'd have pointed out that she'd been negotiating the streets by herself for quite some time. Yes, George's reputation helped keep her safe, but she also relied on her own smarts. May could see that she'd truly made him worry about her, though. He was her older brother, and he'd been responsible for her for far too much of his life. I really am sorry about that, George. I was worried sick. Then there was Jenny, who was absolutely frantic. She had plans for herself. She'd been working on this for months, and then you pulled it right out from underneath her. I just don't know why she didn't tell me about it beforehand. His shoulders sagged as he gazed down on the street below. There was a hint of something in his voice that May hadn't heard before. George had only ever really cared about their own household, and though she knew what she'd done was wrong, it had surprised her that he'd been so angry. Is there some reason she should have told you? She asked quietly. No, he said quickly. Of course not. It's just that she and I had a very long train ride out here together, and we had a chance to discuss it. She explained all about how she'd found the advert in the Matrimonial Times, and how she'd decided that her experience at the hotel would make her a very effective and efficient wife for a man like Mr. Small. Jenny hasn't just been doing her duty and going home. She's been paying attention to how the whole place is run, down to the tiniest of details. A busy rancher with a nice home and 2 kids should have been an easy task for her. May had plenty of her own problems to worry about, but she was starting to wonder if maybe George didn't have a few problems of his own. You know, it struck me as odd that someone as lively and busy as Jenny would want to come out here in the middle of nowhere. She has always claimed to enjoy the finer things in life, always bragging about the tips she'd had, the fancy powders and potions that the hotel guests have for her to try. I know things don't always go the way we plan them, but I thought of her as more of a city girl myself." He scowled at her over his shoulder. "Until you messed that up for her. She could have been just fine if the situation was right, as I imagine she's just fine right now." There was no doubt that she deserved every lecture and tongue lashing in the world right now, but May simply couldn't stand to hear any more of this. She stood up and flicked the wrinkles out of her skirt. "Don't you think you've said quite enough at this point? You're beginning to repeat yourself." "And you've done quite enough," he reminded her, whirling away from the window. It was just like the spats they used to have when they were children, except this time they weren't arguing over who got the last pastry. "Yes, which you seem determined to keep at the forefront of my mind for the rest of my life. Did you never once stop to think about why I did it?" He flung his hands in the air. "I already said I could understand wanting to get out of the slums. The tenements aren't the most pleasant places to live." "It's so much more than that, George." May's chest filled with emotions, but she swallowed to keep any of them from brimming over into tears. She had plenty of reasons to cry, but she could do that later. "You've worked very hard to raise me ever since Ma and Pa died. I can't thank you enough for that. Most nights we had food in our bellies and a roof over our heads." This calmed him down slightly, and he nodded. "I'm not someone who's very demanding, George. I don't have to live in the lap of luxury. The tenements are less than ideal, but I could make our little place work. It's the way our life has felt. I constantly must look for the next chance to steal, and then I continually have to watch my back in case I'm being followed. We take from people without any thought of how it affects them. And then we have to take all the pieces of other people's lives to stitch together a life of our own. I don't want that, George. I want to earn an honest living." He rolled his eyes at her. "Not this nonsense again." May squared her shoulders. "It's not nonsense, George." "Fine, then when we get back to New York, you can get a hotel job. I imagine Jenny's position is vacant if they haven't found someone to fill it just yet. You could even use her name if you want to be her so badly," he stated bitterly. May pressed her lips together. "I certainly do right now because she has a family and a home. She has a man who will care for her and 2 children to dote on. She gets to sit by the fire with her mother-in-law, exchanging stories and sharing a sewing basket. It might not mean very much to you, but it meant a lot to me." George let out an impatient huff. "You women and your dreams. I'm going downstairs. You stay put, right here, and as soon as we can, we're heading back home." He marched out of the room, slamming the door behind him. Home. She could say the word, but it didn't bring to mind visions of their meager apartment with children crying on the other side of the walls and drunk men arguing on the stairs. May knew she had to resign herself to that, though. Where else would she go? What else would she do? Jenny had the position in William's home that was rightfully hers, and May had only broken her own heart by imagining for a small time that that life was the one for her. She had no right to expect a good life. She'd stolen and she'd lied. She'd conned and she'd deceived. This was her punishment for those acts, and she needed to accept this as her fate. Moving to the window, she looked down onto the town of West Ridge. The shops here were not as well outfitted as the ones back in New York City, but even so, they'd arranged their windows to remind everyone just how nice of a Christmas they could have with each other. Wreaths hung on doors and church bells rang in the distance. Down there, in other homes, families were planning their gifts and looking forward to spending special time together. Children were hopeful for peppermint sticks or a few coins, and a lucky few would round up their friends to show them their new sleds. They would be happy. For May, it would be another Christmas without a family. George would be out carousing with the men, just as he was downstairs doing right now. She could hear the loud laughter and the obnoxious music coming from the bar, and she knew that nothing had changed. Her life would be even worse once they returned to the city because she had tasted what it could be like to be someone else for a short while. To be that decent and honest person that she longed to be. May McKinley wasn't decent. She didn't regret the chance to meet William, his children, and Mrs. Small. Even if it all had to be taken from her, It was a time she would treasure in her heart forever. It was as close as she'd ever gotten to her dream. Chapter 10. William's hands were tight enough on the reins that his fingers were beginning to ache, but he couldn't make himself let go of them. His entire body was tense with anger and rage. How could he have let himself be deceived that way? How could anyone do that to him? He'd put an advert in the Matrimonial Times because he knew he needed to find a woman who could take care of his household and his children, and he'd been foolish enough to believe that a woman who wrote to him from the other side of the country would actually be honest about herself. "We're leaving town?" Jenny, the real Jenny, asked as she noticed the buildings and homes slipping by. He blinked and looked around a bit, realizing that he'd urged the horses on as soon as they'd left the train station. He hadn't even taken care of a dress for Camilla, but he could do that another time. In fact, he'd hardly even noticed Jenny on the seat next to him. "Do you want our wedding day to be overshadowed by that nonsense?" William asked in a pithy tone. "Besides, the pastor will still be in town tomorrow. I thought we'd get married right away. It should be just as I told you in my letter. My mother lives with me, so there's a chaperone there at the house. We can get to know each other first." Jenny lifted her chin, looking indignant. "I just thought that since there'd already been the mix-up with May that—" "It was more than a mix-up," he corrected. It was a good thing the horses knew the way home because William wasn't sure he'd be able to guide them very well right now. Jenny, no May. May had spent all that time with him and with his family. She'd been around his children. But she wasn't whom she said she was, and now he didn't know how he was going to navigate through the next part of his life. She leaned away at his ire, but then she straightened up again when she realized it wasn't aimed at her. "You're right, of course. It's been quite devastating for all of us, and I know her brother is very disappointed in her for pulling such a stunt. Still, it would seem prudent to at least stop for supplies before we go back to your ranch. It's been an awfully long trip for me." William glanced at her. Her mouth was pinched tight, and she looked as fed up as he was. He had to remind himself that she'd been just as deceived. "How was it? Did this George fellow look after you?" Her cheeks reddened, and she gave a little nod. "He did." "Well, that's something at least." "Is it always this cold here? Was it?" He hadn't even noticed the chill because his blood was boiling. He glanced at Jenny. This one had a coat, at least. He pulled the cart to a halt and reached into the box under the bench. "It warms up during the spring. We've had a lot of snow in the past month." He put a blanket around her. Jenny's nose wrinkled when she looked down, but she didn't say a word. "I'd hoped to stop at the store and take a look at what kind of things are held in stock. Then I can see what I'd need to order." William collected up the reins. "Order in?" Jenny laughed, picking at the flecks of wood and flint on the blanket before rolling them in her fingers and dropping them onto the ground. "William, I have a house to run. I'm going to need to make sure I have everything I need to be able to run it the right way." He flicked the reins and the wagon rolled onwards. "I can come back if we need anything. I'm not in the mood to deal with anyone right now. I've been through enough. I do hope you have plenty of flour, eggs, and sugar. I plan to do a lot of baking and cooking as soon as we arrive, and I get settled in. I know that May can barely boil an egg, so you and your children must be craving a hearty meal." His children. Oh, his children. What were they going to say? He'd left home with May in the wagon, on the way to get married. Sweet little Camilla had been heartbroken that she wouldn't get to see the ceremony, and Jonathan always longed for an opportunity to see the blacksmith in action. It had been the right decision to leave them behind due to the weather. But now William couldn't imagine how devastated they'd have been if that confrontation by the train station had happened in front of them. They would still be devastated, he knew. He was coming home not with May, but with the real Jenny. He'd exchanged her for a completely different woman, and the thought of having to explain it all made his anger toward May bubble up all over again. She'd acted as though she cared about the twins, but then she'd done this to them. How long had she thought she could keep her ruse going? Dread filled him as they made it up the long drive to the ranch. There was no avoiding what was coming next. His mama and the children came flooding out the door as soon as they arrived, smiles on their faces and their arms open with joy. Rosella's face was the first to change, turning from one of excitement to one of complete confusion. "William, what's going on here?" It didn't take the children very long to notice, either. "Who's that?" Jonathan barked. Camilla took 2 shy steps backward. "Where's Jenny?" "It's a very long story," William replied, exhausted. "We can go inside and sit down, and I'll explain it all to you." "There's no need for all of that when there's work to do," Jenny insisted as William helped her down from her side of the wagon. "Children, this is your father's business. You don't need to be a part of it. I suggest you get on with your chores." Jonathan scowled. "We already did our chores. I imagine there's plenty of firewood that can be brought in before the weather turns," Jenny replied tartly. "Young lady, you can find some kindling. I don't want the stove to be short of fuel for a second. I have a lot to do." "But now, this shouldn't be a discussion for us to have in front of your father. Go on and report back to me in the kitchen as soon as you're done." Jenny flicked her gloved fingers in the air. She flicked her hand again and sent them both a pointed look until they both turned and shuffled off, their dark heads together as they moved. The uncertainty on their faces made regret curl in his belly. He'd always tried to talk to them since Molly died, and it seemed to help if they understood what was happening. "Jenny," he began, but the woman interrupted him. "There's no need to thank me. I know I've only just arrived, but as I told you in my letters, I'm willing to jump right into my duties. I like to run a tight ship, and I'll have this place whipped into shape before you can shake a stick at it. If you'll get my bags, then I'll head into the kitchen." Jenny swiveled on her heel and charged into the house without even waiting. His mother watched her go, waiting until the door closed behind her before she turned to her son. "Who is that, and what did you do with the nice young lady you left here with?" "Oh, Ma," he sighed as he lifted Jenny's valise out of the wagon. "That there is the real Jenny Taylor." Rosella's brow met her white hairline. "Come again?" "It seems I've been the victim of a terrible con. The woman that has been living in our home was actually someone called May McKinley." "Healing." "Jenny told me that she was staying with May the night before she was supposed to leave, and when she awoke the next morning, May and her ticket were gone. She would have made it to Colorado sooner, but—" "The weather," Rosella said, eyes moving to the kitchen window where they could hear cupboard doors being slammed shut. "May stole Jenny's ticket and has been impersonating her the whole time. May's brother kindly accompanied Jenny here. He was waiting for her in town. It explains all the differences when she first arrived," Rosella surmised. She folded her arms and leaned against the front door jamb. "Though I can't figure for the life of me why she would want to pretend to be someone else. I wish I knew how to respond to that," he replied honestly. "What was her brother like?" "A cad, I'd say." His mouth pursed as his eyes moved to where his children were huddled next to the barn. "I'd say nothing like his sister, but then again, I never even knew her name, so I'm clearly not a good judge of character." "Jonathan," he bellowed, cutting off any further speculation from his mother. His son jerked and looked at him. "Come see to the horse, please." "But Pa, I have to collect the firewood." William caught his son's caustic tone. He didn't want to start out by undermining Jenny, the new Jenny, but he had other things to attend to right now. "Sort the horse, then get your firewood. No arguments, please." Chapter 11. William collected the immaculate valise and walked into his house. He stalled in the hallway. All around him were reminders of what May had done. The greenery that filled his house with pine scent and the fluffy tree that leaned crookedly against the wall. He'd wanted to straighten it up, but May had joked that Jonathan had been so pleased with himself for digging the tree out of the ground and setting it into the bucket. If they moved it, the young boy might think that he'd not done a great job. She'd reasoned that she didn't want Jonathan to feel like his work wasn't good enough. William turned away from the tree, his anger bubbling. He faced the salon. The small blanket that May had knitted from the odd balls of yarn was folded neatly on the small chair that she favored. He was tempted to head straight to his own work since that was easier than having to deal with this, but the commotion from the kitchen had his attention. He set Jenny's case down at the foot of the stairs and peered into the kitchen. Goodness, Jenny had already stripped off her coat and gloves, and she firmly pumped a pot full of water. She put it on the stove to heat, and then gestured wildly around her. I can't believe what a state May left this place in. I know I had the opportunity of working in a hotel, so perhaps there are some things I understand better than she does. I did, after all, work around some very wealthy people who know how to live in style. Still, you can't run a household while you leave dirty dishes in the sink. William glanced at the small stack of plates and the pan that May had left. We were in a bit of a hurry this morning, and Camilla needed some special attention. This only earned him a shake of Jenny's head. There's simply no excuse for sloppiness. William. He recalled how sweetly May had dealt with Camilla's distress. Several cupboard doors were ajar. Do you have everything you need? Jenny pinned a smile on her face, and she stepped towards him. William, I am a skilled cook. You will be the best-fed rancher in the territory. He nodded, her reply going somewhat to ease the ache in his chest. He couldn't compare this woman to the one who'd been living under his roof for the past fortnight. This was the one whom he'd proposed to, the one he'd invited to live here with him. That's good to hear. After we're married, there are a few changes I'd like to make, if that's okay with you? He blinked, surprise making his mouth pop open. What changes? Jenny shrugged, looking around his kitchen with a look of distaste. I'm used to a kitchen with more, I don't know. It's just not how I pictured the place, she finished, though it's quite lovely. She added when he scowled at her. I suppose it could do with a woman's touch, he acquiesced. He'd expected May to want to put her mark on the place, though she'd been perfectly content with what they had. He gave himself a mental shake. May was an illusion, nothing more, nothing less. And now May was gone. Jenny was his fiancée. I only want to do a good job for my husband, Jenny whined. Then that's all a man can ask for, he said, making his mouth curve upwards. Can you send the girl in? You mean Camilla? Jenny waved his comment away. Yes, who else? She could have cleared away this mess whilst you were in town. Honestly, what did May let them get away with? She stuck her head in another cupboard. I have much to sort out before I can start cooking. I see you do have a few good cuts of meat, as I suppose you would with all these cattle, so we'll be having a nice roast for supper. I'll send her in. William stepped into the frosty afternoon air and went in search of his children. He could hear their voices in the stable and found them working in unison to settle the horse. Sorry, Daddy, I'll go get the kindling. Actually, Jenny wants you to help her in the kitchen. Camilla's eyes lit up. To bake cookies? No, the dishes, Camilla. May didn't. Who's May? Jonathan's head appeared over the stable door. Where's Jenny? William pinched the bridge of his nose. Maybe the new Jenny had the right idea in withholding the information from them because he sure as heck could barely work it out for himself. That's the real Jenny. The other Jenny was a fake? William nodded at his son. That's right. The twins exchanged a look, and he wished that he could be included in their thoughts. It often spooked him how one could say what the other was thinking. She's the one I was writing to. The one I proposed to. William settled his hat more comfortably on his head. He wondered who it was he was trying to convince here. The one I'm going to marry. Now, go help her in the kitchen. You both be polite and nice to her. Jonathan, make sure that bucket of firewood is full before supper time, please. As Jenny promised, the 5 of them were seated around the dining table a few hours later. The table was laden with a feast, and the delicious scent of the roast filled the air. Well, this looks wonderful, Jenny. William's stomach grumbled as Jenny dished a healthy portion onto his plate. He hadn't eaten anything since breakfast, preferring to go out and deal with his cattle than with the real situation at hand. I told you I could cook. She smiled coyly at him and took a seat next to him. He joined his hands in prayer, his opening words interrupted when Jenny set her cutlery back down to quickly put her hands together. He gave thanks for their blessings and tried to keep his mind from thinking about those pretty blue eyes being filled with regret and tears. He cut into the tender meat and popped it into his mouth. The food was as tasty as it smelled. Maybe all was not lost. He looked to his children, his brows meeting. Their eyes were downcast, and their expressions were glum. "Are you not hungry, Camilla?" His daughter's eyes moved to Jenny. She silently gave her father a nod and collected up a fork. "Yes, Daddy," Jenny skicked. "Aren't you a little too old to be calling your father Daddy still, young lady?" "You just called her a young lady," Jonathan pointed out. "So which is she, young or old?" Jenny's mouth flapped. She looked at William. "Are you going to let him speak to me like that?" The food turned to ash in his mouth. The one thing he'd not wanted was to have to be the adjudicator in his own home. "Jonathan, you know better than to question an adult." Jenny sent the young man a gloating look, though it was short-lived. "But my daughter can call me whatever she chooses to, Jenny." The table fell into silence. William's mind jumped to their meal last night, the laughter and the joviality of it all. His children had worshipped May. He speared up another tender morsel of meat, and he tried not to think about what she was doing. Had they caught the next train, or did they have to wait for tomorrow? "I found the carrots and potatoes in the root cellar," Jenny explained. "The whole thing needs to be completely reorganized, and I won't be waiting until spring. Children, that will be your task first thing tomorrow morning after breakfast. I do hope you do a better job than you did on the firewood. You brought in more dirt and snow than you did firewood." "I put everything in that root cellar myself, you know." Small said indignantly, "I've been managing the household for the past year." The frown that always seemed to be on Jenny's face deepened. "Then it's a very good thing I'm here now. It simply won't do. The potatoes are too close to the stairs. They're going to get wet and rot." "They've always done very well in that particular spot. And I don't think you're taking into account just how dry the air is out here in Colorado," Rosella replied patiently. Jenny lifted her head from her roast and cast a firm glance across the table at her elder. "This is my household to run now, so you can spend your time in front of the fireplace mending socks." William shoved a potato in his mouth. It was creamy and flavorful, perfectly cooked. It abated his hunger, but it didn't make him feel any better. As deceitful as May was, she'd only ever been kind to his family. Had she faked that part too? He began to wonder if he'd made a terrible mistake in bringing this new Jenny here. Chapter 12. "Come spring, there's a lot that will need to change," Jenny announced. "The rug in the living room, for one. All the walls need to be repainted, and we need far more cabinets in the kitchen than what we do right now." William looked up from the plate of griddle cakes in front of him. They were delicious, but he was having a hard time enjoying them when Jenny was constantly complaining. The woman started every sentence with the words, "Come spring." "I worked very hard on this house, and it's one of the nicest ones in West Ridge." Jenny shook her head. "Not compared to the sort of places I've seen in New York City. They're far more lavish, and if we're stuck out here in the middle of nowhere, then I don't see why we can't enjoy it. Even the children ought to have a better place to sleep. We can start right now by getting rid of that ratty old blanket on Camilla's bed." His daughter's eyes widened and filled with tears. "But my mommy made me that quilt." "If you're sentimental about it, then perhaps we can find a place to store it. It's unraveling at the edges, and it's unsightly." "It'll have to go," Jenny asserted. William slowly put his fork down on the edge of his plate. The air felt so thick and tense around him that he wasn't sure he could get enough breath to speak. "Do you happen to know when Mr. McKinley and his sister will be traveling back east?" His potential wife gave him an irritated look, or at least he thought she did. She always looked that way, and it was hard to tell. "I did happen to have quite a long time to stand around at the train station and look at the schedule while George was trying to decide how he was going to find May. There's a train heading east toward Kansas this afternoon, and I imagine that's the one they'll take." William nodded. "This afternoon," he repeated. "Yes. Good. Then we still have time. Pack your bags, please, and don't worry about washing the dishes." He dabbed his napkin on his lips and moved his plate toward the center of the table before he rose out of his chair. You don't really mean to send me back, do you?" Jenny asked, appalled. She braced her fists on her hips, clearly understanding his meaning right away. After all I've done for you? Jenny, you may have cooked some very nice meals, but they don't make up for your sharp tongue. You've been rude and demanding ever since you got here, and it's obvious to me that you're not really going to be happy here. William felt terribly guilty for wanting to take her back to town and put her on a train after less than a day, but he simply couldn't stand it any longer. He had some wrongs to right, and this was where it needed to start. I suppose you're right. It's much more exciting back in New York City, and there are so many opportunities that I was passing up. I won't be long. She gave one last derisive look to the dirty dishes before she headed upstairs. Mother, would you be so kind as to watch the children while I'm gone? I'll try to make this as quick as possible. William tugged on his boots. William, it will be my absolute pleasure. Tell me, if you're dropping her off in town, do you plan on picking anyone else up? Rosella asked with a twinkle in her eye. It was too much to hope that he could fix his mistakes that easily, but he nodded. If I can, children, please behave. Does this mean I don't have to get rid of my quilt? Camilla asked hopefully. William tied his laces and then dropped a kiss on top of her head. You certainly don't, my dear. Jenny was silent for most of the ride back into Westridge town, but even if she'd been talking, William would have heard the long, lonesome sound of the train whistle above all else. He urged the horses onward against the chance that the rail system was running early, racing into town and flying down the street far faster than courtesy called for. Jenny pressed her hand against her hat to keep it from falling off. William. He swept up in front of the train station, taking just enough time to help Jenny down before he darted to the platform. William searched the crowd, looking for anything familiar, and he caught a flash of blue wool. May! George and May turned toward him. They both looked exhausted, but he caught the way May startled when she saw him. Her eyes widened in delight, though she tried to hide the expression quickly. I suppose you're here to bring me the rest of my things, she said. Oh, he looked back at Jenny. He hadn't even thought about the fact that May had left her belongings at the house. I guess I should have. May's expression grew puzzled when she divided a look between Jenny and William. Then why are you in town? Because they're getting married, George said irritably. Come on, we have a train to catch. May tugged her arm out of her brother's grasp. Then why is Jenny's case in the wagon? William wasn't the sort of man who expressed all his emotions right in the middle of a train station for all to hear. But William knew this would be his only chance. Thoughts of her fleeing off to New York without any way for him to find her had haunted his dreams last night. The idea of never looking upon her sweet face again filled him with dread. Was it all a lie? He blurted the question out, uncaring that it sounded desperately needy. I need to know. Her eyes filled with tears. No. The crowd ebbed and flowed around them as he stared at her. He wanted to believe her. Ma said you couldn't have faked all of it. She said that no one is that good at pretending to like everything. A small smile touched her mouth. Rosella has a way with words. How are the twins? Did they? They're fine, he said, his shoulder coming up in a half shrug. They miss you. I miss them. He heard Jenny's snort behind him, but ignored her. May, I don't want you to leave. I want you to stay with me. But Jenny, she isn't happy here, and I'm not happy here without you. May, I'm ashamed of not seeing it myself earlier, but I love you. The words came out far easily than he'd imagined, and now that they had, he found that he wanted to say them again. They made his heart pound and his head throb, but in the most wonderful way. I love you. Chapter 13. Her eyes glistened with tears, and he could sense the way she leaned toward him, but May pulled herself back. William, you make my heart sing by saying things like that, but I'm afraid it can't be true. He felt the edges of his heart beginning to shatter. Why not? Because I'm a good person, she explained simply, her hand fluttering against her throat. I might have been pretending to be Jenny, but I don't think you quite understand just who I was before I came out here. Then tell me, he challenged. He glanced up, seeing that the train was just chugging into the station. It would only be here long enough to unload its passengers and take on new ones, but he willed the platform clock to slow. I'm not worthy of you, William. May's brows rumpled as she tried to find the words. Our parents died a long time ago, and George and I have done the best we could to scrape by. We've spent almost every day of our lives stealing from those who are better off than us or lying our way out of a predicament. I've stolen food, and I've stolen nice items that were sold to buy food. I didn't like it. I tried to live honestly, but I kept pulling you back in, George admitted to her. May looked at her brother. I don't mean to seem ungrateful, George. I know you did best by me. George shoved his hands in his pockets and kicked the ground at his feet. Not really. I knew you weren't happy, May. I needed your nimble fingers, but I always knew that you could make an honest life if you put your mind to it. George, May trailed off, staring at her bashful brother. You can be whatever you want to be. You're a McKinley. May was taken aback by her brother. She'd never pleaded her case quite so openly. She looked at William. I tried so hard to keep my old life hidden while I was with you, but I can see now that I can't make it go away forever. It's simply who I am. I hate to even tell you because I'd rather you never have to know about it all. But I want to make those changes. If I am to truly live a better life, then I have to have you look upon me, warts and all. I'm going to try to be the person I was when I lived under your roof. Or at least, be honest about who I am. I'm going to get a proper job in New York. Then, maybe one day, I can meet a man who is half as kind and honorable as you are, William Small, because you deserve a truthful and honest wife. William shook his head. I'm not nearly as honorable as you seem to think. I've told the odd lie here and there to get by. White lies don't count, she said. If there's any small chance that you could love me, I'd want it to be based on the truth this time. Oh, May. William was vaguely aware that there were plenty of other folks swarming the platform, but he saw only her. You didn't lie to me. I've seen the real May McKinley, the one who leaves dirty dishes in the sink because she'd rather make Christmas decorations with the children. The one who tried her best to make a good meal for her family, not because she was proud and wanted to show off her skills, but because she wanted to make sure they had full bellies. The one who cared more about Camilla getting the dress she wanted, even if it cost her that much more embarrassment. A single tear dripped down May's cheek, and she swiped it away quickly. They're such dear children. His heart softened even more toward her, though he hadn't thought it could. I've also seen the May McKinley who made some very desperate choices to get out of a very desperate situation. I know now that those couldn't have been easy choices, and they weren't decisions you made lightly, but you committed to them in a way I had never realized anyone could. William dared to touch his finger to that one length of blonde hair that always refused to stay in place, and he brushed it aside. Her cheeks reddened, and she swallowed. Does that mean you forgive me? Forgive you? More than that. William took her hand in his. He gazed into her eyes, which he'd become so fond of in such a short time. May McKinley, I do hope you'll do me the great honor of marrying me. Oh, William. She squeezed his hand as she fished for a handkerchief to wipe her streaming tears away. I will. Of course I will. It's Christmas Eve and the church is open. Let's go right now, he urged, not wanting to waste another moment without her in his life. George cleared his throat. What about Jenny? Don't be silly. Jenny stood next to George. She slipped her hand through the crook of his elbow. They make much more sense than William and I would. Besides, can't you see? They're in love. You're staying here? William draped an arm around May's shoulder. She is. I'm sorry that you have had a wasted trip. Here, let me reimburse you. George lifted a palm. No need, Mr. Small. I had myself a little flutter on the tables last night. He tapped his pocket. I can pay for my own way. George winked at May, who smiled. Her brother would always be okay. It wasn't in his nature to be anything else. The train whistle sounded, reminding them all that time stood still for no one. We have a train to catch, Jenny added. She pulled at George, and to May's astonishment, her brother obediently complied. Wait, May reached out to her friend. I do hope you can forgive me. I never meant to hurt you. Jenny's dark gaze flicked from William to George. I think that maybe you did me a favor, May. I can see that perhaps this all ended up just as it was meant to be. Now you two get off to the church and have a Merry Christmas. We'll write soon. George extended his hand. "Take care of her, William." William shook it. "You can count on that." With May's hand tucked in his elbow, the two of them waved to George and Jenny through the train windows, turning away as it chugged out of the station. The day was cold and bright, and a bitter wind swept the platform, but he didn't feel it as long as May was at his side. "Shall we head over to the church, Miss May McKinley of the bluest eyes and blonde hair?" Her smile was genuine as she looked up at him. "That would be the best Christmas present ever." With a jolt, William realized that all the commotion with May, Jenny, and George had nearly forgotten one of the most important things he needed to be doing this time of year. "Yes, Christmas presents. That means we'll need to make a few more stops before we head home." Chapter 14. May woke early the next morning, long before the sun had made its way above the horizon. It wasn't yet time to get up and start her normal chores, but she didn't mind the disturbance in her sleep. It gave her more time to appreciate everything she had. Slipping out of bed, she dressed quickly and found her slippers to avoid the chill that had seeped into the room overnight. She stirred up the few remaining embers in the fireplace and added a log so that it wouldn't be as cold when William woke up, and even that simple task had her feeling fulfilled. She liked knowing that she was taking care of those she loved. Quietly turning the doorknob and making sure the latch didn't click loudly when it fell back into place, May crept out into the hallway. The next door on the right belonged to Jonathan, and she peeked inside. He looked like he'd crashed into bed the night before, with the covers rumpled and one stockinged foot sticking out. May carefully covered him up, smiling to herself about how hard he slept. It was no wonder considering how energetic he was during the day. Camilla's room was just across the hall. The children's rooms were small and simple, but they were filled with love. The little girl had her dollies lined up on her pillow next to her, watching over her through the night. A battered quilt was spread perfectly across her bed, and Camilla clutched the corner of it in one small fist. She was such a sweet sight, and May couldn't resist dropping a kiss on her forehead, even at the risk of waking her up. As May moved through the house, she felt gratitude swelling inside of her. Life hadn't always been easy. In fact, it had never really been easy at all. Her heart lifted at the simplest of things now. It was the joy of her hand on the banister as she descended the stairs and the quiet thump of the floorboards under her feet. It was the way the sunlight would come streaming through the front window as soon as daylight broke, illuminating the evergreen tree that was now merely a shadow in the corner. Even the rug under her feet as she crossed through the room felt like pure luxury. Her soul felt calm and peaceful in a way that she'd never experienced. Entering the kitchen, she found that she could even be grateful for that complicated stove that she was still trying so hard to learn how to use. Rosella had vowed last night that she would spend her dying breath showing May how to use it. It gave her a challenge, but that trial was a labor of love that would allow her to take care of her new family. She had some struggles ahead of her, but May knew that she would cherish every moment as long as her family was at her side. With more eagerness than she ever could have imagined, May began laying a fire. "You're up early," Rosella said as she came into the kitchen, wrapped in her robe. Worried, May brought her hand to her lips. "I hope I didn't wake you. I was trying to be quiet." Rosella chuckled as she lowered herself into one of the kitchen chairs. "No, don't you worry about that. I've always woken up early on Christmas morning, ever since I was a child. Even after all these years, I suppose I just can't help myself. It's an exciting time to be with family and see the sparkle in the children's eyes. Of course, it's all even more exciting now." May finished packing the kindling into the stove. "Is it?" "Of course. The Lord has blessed us. You're here, my dear." May blushed. She paused in her fire building to look at her mother-in-law. "You're too kind to me." No. I don't think there's any such thing as being too kind. There's simply not enough kindness in this world, and it leaves too many people feeling cold and alone," the older woman insisted. "Besides, I can tell what a good person you are." Thinking of the terrible things she'd done to get here, May had a moment of doubt. "I don't mean to be rude, but you hardly even know me. except to know that I tricked your son. I've felt as though sometimes you've been trying to avoid me ever since I arrived. Well, since I arrived the first time," she clarified. Indeed, Rosella was always excusing herself to go do something else, or saying that her bones hurt and that she needed to sit in front of the fire. There'd only been a few times that May had had the chance to interact with her. She'd enjoyed those moments, but she hadn't been sure that Rosella had. The older woman shook her head. "I didn't mean for it to appear that way. I was simply trying to step back and allow you and William and the children to have a chance to get to know each other. I would have only gotten in the way." May set a match to the kindling, watching the new flame for a moment to make sure it took. "You could never be in the way. You're an incredibly caring woman, and I'm very glad to see that you're back with us." Mrs. Small gave her a sweet smile. It was hard to take such a high compliment when she didn't feel that she entirely deserved it. She still felt guilty for what she'd done, but even more she was relieved not to have to lie about who she was anymore. There was a simple ease between the two women, and May couldn't have felt luckier. "I'm glad to be back as well." The women lapsed into a comfortable silence. May made them tea, and she busied herself with preparing breakfast. Christmas though it might be, she was a rancher's wife now. There would still be plenty of outdoor chores that needed to be done once the festivities had finished. She didn't want him going to work hungry. It didn't take long before chaos erupted at the top of the stairs. "Daddy, come on. You're too slow. Where's May?" William's chuckle drifted down into the kitchen. "It smells to me like she's in the kitchen." "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" May called out with a giggle. "I didn't burn anything this time." Her new husband strode into the kitchen. He was dressed for the day in his shirt and trousers, with a few extra layers on underneath for warmth. "Then I'm offended. How can you say it's Christmas if my biscuits aren't even burned?" The children laughed, although May had an idea that they didn't quite comprehend the joke between the two of them. She looked at William and saw the bright happiness in his eyes, sparkling like snow in the sunshine. Her own eyes likely looked the same, considering how soft and safe he made her feel inside. May raised one eyebrow. "Would you like me to toss one back in the fire for you, just for old time's sake?" He let out a loud laugh as he kissed her forehead. "I wouldn't want to put you through any trouble." Breakfast was a quick affair, with the children eating as swiftly as manners would allow. "Can we go open presents now?" Jonathan asked. He was moving around so much in his chair that he reminded May of a pot about to boil over. William's knife deliberately slowed down as he was cutting his ham into pieces. "I don't know. It's a holiday, and it would be nice to take things easy for a while. You know, sit around in front of the fire, sharing stories and talking about old times." "You grown-ups can do that part afterward," Camilla suggested helpfully. As cute as it was, William managed to resist. "And of course, I'll have plenty of chores around the ranch that need to be done. The cattle must be managed no matter what the calendar says. Then it'll be bedtime before we know it." Prosody, "I'm not sure what else we would need to do today besides that." Both children exploded with laughter and protests. William shoved the last bite of ham in his mouth, rose from his chair, and reached for May's hand. "I don't know why, but I have the strangest feeling that the children are hoping for presents. Would you accompany me to the living room to find out, Mrs. McKinley?" Blushing, May laid her hand on his and allowed him to help her up from the table. "I'd be delighted." She waited patiently while Jonathan and Camilla made sure their Gram didn't need any help getting up from her chair, and then she walked with William into the living room, hand in hand. It was only a few steps, and it was the simplest of gestures, but it made her feel like she was finally special. The sun had filled the room now, and as they took their seats around the Christmas tree, May felt an excitement building up inside her that she thought just might be equivalent to what the children were feeling. She couldn't wait to see their faces, and her heart was so high it might have gone sailing out the windows and into the clear December sky. William picked up a package wrapped in brown paper. "Jonathan, this is to you from us." Though she already sat next to him on the sofa, May found that she longed to move even closer to her new husband. There was something about him referring to the two of them as us that simply delighted her. A knife. Jonathan carefully unfolded the blade from the handle. One of my very own? I think you could use that around the ranch, but you must be very careful with it. I'll show you everything you need to know, although I know you already had a lesson from May, William said with a wink. Thank you. Thank you so much. You're very welcome. Camilla, you're next. He handed her the next package. This parcel was much bigger than Jonathan's, and the way her eyes widened when she saw what lay inside showed that she held it just as dear. A blue woolen dress, she squealed, standing up so she could hold it against herself. It's beautiful. It's just what I wanted. I'll look just like you, May. She smiled at the sweet little girl. Glad that they'd been able to find one already made, though she had been up long after their lamps had gone out to make the alterations. We can even wear our dresses at the same time if you'd like. William got up from his seat and reached all the way back behind the tree, pulling out a long package that May hadn't even seen. This is for you, my dear. For me? May was flabbergasted as she took the heavy present into her lap. When did you get a chance to get anything for me? Or to sneak it in behind the tree like that where I wouldn't see it? Her husband laughed. We were both very busy while we were in town yesterday. It was easy enough to slip a nickel to one of the shop boys and have him put it in the back of the cart when you weren't looking. Go on, open it. She peeled away the brown paper to reveal several bolts of fabric. Her hands ran over the various colors, patterns, and textures: cotton, wool, linen, and even some bombazine. She'd hardly ever had the chance to make her dresses from raw yardage, always having to alter whatever she'd snagged off a laundry line. Oh, William, these are just beautiful. I hope that you'd like them, he replied, almost looking shy. I wasn't sure what colors or fabrics you'd need. They're lovely. May dipped her hands into the folds of the fabric, realizing that she'd hardly be limited at all in what she wanted to make. Her mind buzzed as she thought of all the things she'd love to add to their household. I don't even know where to begin. Prosody Rhett. I have a few paper patterns I've ordered out of magazines, Rosella advised. I'm more than happy for you to look through them. Thank you, and thank you again, William. I simply don't know what to say. May held the fabric on her lap while the adults continued to exchange their gifts, including a delicate glass Christmas ornament that William had purchased for his mother and which was quickly placed with pride on the tree. It's our turn, Jonathan announced. May had noticed the way he'd been simmering with energy again. At first, she'd assumed he was simply caught up in the excitement of the holiday, but then she noticed that light in his eyes and knew he had something up his sleeve. Our turn? We have presents for you, Camilla squealed. When did you have a chance to do anything like that? William asked. The weather has been too bad for me to take you into town. Rosella grinned at her grandchildren. They're very resourceful little things. May glanced at the tree and the mantel, not seeing any other presents. And where are these gifts? Without a word, Jonathan and Camilla got up and raced to their rooms. They came rushing back down a moment later, their cheeks pink and their smiles wide. I want to go first. Jonathan's gift was swaddled in a crinkled bit of paper, and he put it right between William and May on the sofa. This is for both of you. Inside was a tiny star, fashioned out of twigs and tied together with bits of string. An extra loop of string at the top served as a hanger. This is marvelous, May wondered. And you made this all by yourself? She'd never seen him look prouder of himself. I did. I remembered all that we did with the Christmas decorations, and I wanted to make more. Very good job, son. William rose and carefully hung Jonathan's creation from the tree. That looks like a perfect spot to me. Now that her brother had taken his turn, Camilla suddenly looked a little shy as she placed a tiny package in each of their hands. I don't know if you'll like them. May was just about to reassure her that, of course, they would like them, but as she unwrapped the paper, she knew that a statement could never be more true. She unfolded the square of fabric inside, recognizing it as the plain handkerchief that had once been Camilla's. It was now embroidered all around the edge in blue thread, showing off the blanket stitch that May had taught her just before that disastrous trip to town. May stared down at the delicate stitching in her hand. It was uneven, and there were several loops and knots on the backside where Camilla had lost control of her thread, but it was the most amazing gift she could have gotten. "It's wonderful," May breathed. Camilla beamed, and she stepped forward to point out what she'd done for William. His had also started out as just a plain hanky, but it now had a large letter W in the corner that listed to the right. "That's W for William," she explained. "I didn't really know how to do it, but Graham helped. It's perfect, and I'll use it all the time." He tucked it into his pocket as proof. "Thank you." With the unwrapping all done, Camilla headed up to her room to try on her dress. Jonathan yanked on his boots and ran out the back door, eager to make more ornaments for the tree. Rosella made her excuses that she needed to retire to her room for the moment to make up for getting so early. And the two of them were left on the sofa. May turned to her husband. Though she'd been delighted at their wonderful Christmas morning, she was very aware that something was missing. "William, I'm afraid I didn't get the chance to get you a present. Time got away from me, and I was busy with the children. I didn't think to be quite as sneaky as you were when we were in town." In fact, the time they'd spent in West Ridge had felt completely different to her from any other time she'd been among shops and businesses. May had been perfectly content simply to walk around and look at what was for sale, without any need or longing in her heart if she had William at her side. He held her hand firmly in between his two as he gazed into her eyes. "May, you've given me the most magnificent gift. Having you here with me is just remarkable." "I've already had far too many compliments today," she demurred as she studied the rug. He pulled her hand a little closer to him to make her look back up. "No, May, I could never tell you enough how much I love and appreciate you. Not just the relationship that I have with you, but the ones I see you building with my mother and the children. It's like a dream come true. I only have one regret." "You do?" The cozy, homey feeling of the morning had lulled her into a peace she'd never known before, but now her heart hammered against her ribs. "What's that?" He lifted one of his hands to run a finger along her jawline. "That I didn't marry you the moment you stepped off that train. I love you, May. I love you too, William. Merry Christmas." And as he placed a gentle kiss on her lips, she knew that it was indeed. Epilogue. A year or so later. Spring had always been William's favorite season. He loved the way the fresh grass filled the air with its sweet scent, and the flowers were beginning to bloom. Even the sunshine and the wind had a different feel to them. It was all a sign that the Lord had brought them safely through the winter, and now he would bring them through to a bountiful summer. He pulled up in front of the barn, glad that he was back. It hadn't been a particularly long trip, and both his weather and his trade prospects had left him feeling happy, but he found that he always longed to be back on the ranch. The smack of a door made him look up, and he saw Jonathan and Camilla dashing down off the porch. William's heart surged. "Is everything all right? Where's your mother?" Camilla came around the side of the wagon, hopping up and down as she tried to see what was inside. "She's in the house with Graham, of course. Why?" He tried to force his heart back into a normal cadence. William lifted down a couple of canvas bags of goods he'd brought back from the general store and handed them to the children, wondering if he would ever stop worrying about May. "The way you came tearing out into the yard, I thought something was wrong." "No." Jonathan struggled with the ungainly bag until he had a good grip on it. "She just has swollen ankles." "Jonathan?" Camilla admonished. She wagged her finger at her brother, but the action nearly caused her to drop her heavy load. "She wouldn't want you telling him that." The boy rolled his eyes. "You don't think he's going to notice when she's sitting in the front room with her feet on the stool and her ankles looking like stuffed sausages?" William busied himself with getting the last parcel as he tried to suppress a laugh. "I'm very sure she wouldn't want you saying that." "She was the one who said it to Graham," Jonathan defended himself. "Maybe we should just talk about something else," William suggested. "I hope you were both good helpers while I was gone." Camilla trotted along next to him, her short legs moving quickly to keep up with his long ones. "Graham and I made bread. and Mama May worked on sewing. I got to help with that some too, while the bread was rising. Jonathan raced up the porch steps, determined as ever to be the fastest at everything. I fed the chickens and hoed up some of the vegetable garden. Mom says we're going to plant tomatoes there. William waited as Jonathan opened the door for him. The children had mourned deeply for Molly, as they should have. Neither he nor May had ever pushed them to call his new wife by anything but her name, and May seemed surprisingly determined at times to make sure they preserved their memories of their true mother. Hearing them refer to her in such a dear way filled his heart to bursting, and so did the scene he found when he walked through the door. May was in front of the fireplace, though the last remains of the morning's fire had nearly died down as the day grew warmer. She had her feet up just as Jonathan had described, although William noted her ankles didn't look like sausages. May held a tiny nightgown in her hands, using a needle and thread to put on the finishing touches. The light fabric draped delicately down over the roundness of her stomach that stretched the limits of her dress. She looked up at him as soon as he walked in, and a smile spread across her face. "You're back." May put down her sewing and braced her arms against the chair. No, don't get up. I'll come to you." William put his parcel down and crossed the room to drop a kiss on her forehead. "I'm not made of porcelain," she chided with a sweet little smile. "I'm not going to break, and it isn't as though I can just sit here forever. There's always plenty to be done." "Maybe so, but you're doing the most important work right now." He gently caressed the back of his finger over her stomach, marveling at what a miracle she was able to perform. "How did your trip go?" she asked. May had considered riding into town with him, but she hadn't felt well earlier in the morning. "Very well. I got all the supplies that we talked about, including plenty more fabric for you. I spoke with several gentlemen about business, and we won't have a problem at all this year with selling off some cattle and trading out some bulls. We'll do just fine." He rocked back on his heels, pleased that this venture had turned out to be a prosperous one. "You also have a letter." "Oh, it's from George," she exclaimed as she took the envelope he offered her. "I haven't heard from him in a few months." William had known she'd be eager to receive it. The brother and sister had patched up their differences easily enough, though he knew that May worried for him. His last missive had indicated that he was finally going to do something to better his life. He hadn't suggested what it was, but William knew that it left May feeling full of hope. "Daddy, look." Camilla had picked up the little nightgown that May had set down and showed him the hem. "Mama May let me embroider it. She says I'm getting much better." Studying what she showed him, William had to agree. A tiny row of flowers marched across the bottom of the gown, all done in a pretty yellow thread. "I think she's quite right." "Pa, can you come and check where I want to plant these tomato seedlings?" Jonathan urged. William felt pulled in a dozen directions. Everyone wanted his attention, and even Rosella had just come through the kitchen doorway, wiping flour off her hands. He knew he needed to get outside and check on his cows that would be calving soon as well. None of it bothered him in the least, because this busy, happy home was exactly what he'd been needing. "William?" May sat up straight, clutching the letter in her hands. "Listen, you won't believe this." They all turned to face her, eager to hear what she had to say. "What is it?" William asked. She let go of one side of the letter to brace her fingertips against her lips as her eyes skimmed the letter once again. "George and Jenny have got married." "That's wonderful news," William enthused. While he and Jenny never would have made a good couple, he'd always felt a bit guilty about sending her back to New York. He was glad to hear that the mix-up hadn't caused her much trouble in the end. May had explained how Jenny had managed to get a new job at a better hotel and how her ambition would ensure that she got as far as she wanted to go. Thinking back to the outspoken Jenny, he could well believe it. "When you write your return letter, be sure to send along my congratulations." But May was still looking excitedly at the letter as she reached out and took his hand. "There's more. They're going to have a baby. Jenny will probably give birth just a few months after I do. George says he's found a position working in construction. It's going to pay enough that they're moving out of the tenements and into a nicer place. They're starting their lives over completely. William loved to see that joy on her face. He'd learned over the last year that May always had a way of finding the silver lining in every cloud. Even if there was a bad storm, she cherished the time indoors with her family. There seemed to be little that could truly get her down, and the delight she felt when she received good news genuinely radiated from her. It seems like all of us finally get a happy home. May set the letter down and looked around her at her family. When her gaze lifted to meet William's, she looked even happier than ever. Yes, we certainly do. The end.